Okay, cool. Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm going live.
Welcome, one and all, to yet another episode of Whick TV. It's a cross ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. Today, we have a show for you tonight. One of our guests is on their way. They're having a little bit of a connection issues, but worst case, they'll join us on their phone. Loanerbox, she'll be here shortly. But in the interest of timeliness and respecting everyone here on my panel who has shown up on time, we are going to just get into it. Today, we are going to be talking about liberalism and populism. Ryan, our guest of honor today, recently did what I thought was a very thoughtful video on the subject, and I thought it would make for a good discussion. And we've brought some people in who disagree and some who agree. And we're going to start by giving the mic to Mr. ReasonRiffs here. Tell people who you are, what you do, why we should listen to you, and then we'll just kind of go around, give each short introductions, short opening thoughts on the subject, and hopefully by the time we're done, Loanerbox will be here and we'll start. So go ahead, Reason, give us what you got.
Yeah, during the day I'm doing physics, research in statistical physics, and I often write for the pragmatic papers in the evening, and I'm very interested in politics, political philosophy, and a whole host of other subjects. So yeah, please follow me on YouTube, on X, and yeah, feel free to DM me if you want to debate. So I mean, I can start by thinking about how I self-define myself politically. I find it pretty tricky, actually. I don't particularly like isms, so this should make the debate interesting. But nevertheless, liberalism encapsulates moderation. I think most people can agree with that. In that sense, I am a liberal. My political positions are moderately guided by liberal principles. I'm inspired by liberalism. I'm not going to define myself by it, but I'm inspired by it. And at the hearting beat of liberalism, one of the reasons I like it so much is that it's a pragmatic system for correcting error. It protects pluralism, open discussion, the marketplace of ideas, which is something we were discussing last week, is a key and important part of our democracy. Individual liberty, the openness to all classes, expert groups, it appeals to science, it appeals to changing direction. Populism contradicts that. It claims political legitimacy through a simplified model of unity, the people versus an elite, and an enemy, some enemy, boogeyman, that must be defeated. Subtleties, noise, doubt are all averaged out in a simple us and them narrative. This activates a dangerous psychology that's been studied, which is an us and them psychology, that liberal pragmatic politics is actually meant to restrain and fight against. So there's a contradiction there. And I think that's kind of at the heart of today's debate.
Okay, we'll get into it, I'm sure, as we go. Mr. Ryan, please tell people who you are, what you do, why we should listen to you, and your thoughts on the matter. Go ahead.
Well, I recently made a video about populism and liberalism, which was, I'll say, tastefully controversial. It's always good to be tastefully controversial. You don't want to be too controversial, but you can't be too stable. You can't be too, non-offensive to people. You got to keep people on their toes. So I think I am a liberal. Well, I know that I'm a liberal. And I think whenever we look at the history of liberalism, it's interesting knowing that both of the people that Soy and I are going to be talking to today are British, because I think there might be an interesting clash of traditions here. In the United States, nobody called themselves a liberal. Nobody called the political tradition that they were part of liberalism until FDR. That was whenever liberalism became a systematized political thing. Before that, people called themselves progressives, people called themselves Republicans or Democrats, people called themselves populists even. We had the Populist Party before we had FDR's New Deal. And even in the American Revolution, we didn't call ourselves liberals, we called ourselves Whigs and Tories. So, but of course, in the UK, the Liberal Party emerged before the New Deal in the United States. So it could be that there's an interesting clash of tradition here. But in the United States, the birth of liberalism as a distinct system was in FDR's New Deal, and I think that was populist. That was a populist movement. I think we can look at the antecedents to modern liberalism in the United States, and we also see populism. The abolitionists were very frequently engaging in populist rhetoric about the slave power, is what they called it, the Southern elites that were controlling the US federal government. Before that, we had the American Revolution. Thomas Paine, the man whose pamphlet inspired the common people to fight for the American Revolution, he wrote Common Sense. That's about as populist as you can get for naming a pamphlet in 1776. He said in that pamphlet that of more worth to society is one honest man than all the crowned ruffians that ever lived. That's populist rhetoric. I think today we see populist rhetoric being used by liberal politicians to great effect. I think one example that I highlighted in my video was John Ossoff. He was the first, one of the first Democrats to start saying like the Epstein class. I think that's pretty unambiguously populist. He always talks about how the Trump administration is an administration by and for the richest people in American society, and I think that's objectively true. There's a certain degree to which being afraid to talk about the degree that the wealthy and powerful have control over the current administration because it sounds populist is to just deny reality. But I'm sure we'll get into that, and I don't want to take up any more time.
Well, thank you for being here. And just so everyone's aware, I have a link to the Ryan's video in my YouTube description after the show. If you'd like, check it out. It's worth watching. Let's give the mic to Soy Pill. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mostly agree with Ryan. I think, minus the historical context, as I don't read, populism is, like ReasonRiffs said, an us versus them mentality, and this can lead to poison. That's why you see overlap with, Trump and Bernie voters, or like these weird like AOC to Trump voters. But that doesn't mean that we should write off the concept of populism because, one, it's not really a party or a movement. It is a us versus them rhetoric that capitalizes on people's hate for a system that actually often doesn't work for them. And there are plenty of true examples of elites doing something to subvert the will of the people. And I think if you cede these narratives to people who are going to do more slopulism, bad populism, then you're unfortunately ceding a lot of the energy that would otherwise help you win elections. You can look at the recession and how lots of people said, no, we shouldn't have bailed out the banks. They caused this recession. Well, that is slopulism because, yes, they did cause the recession, but not bailing them out might have crashed the entire economy, and that would have been awful. But if you cede that ground to them and say, well, that's the only answer, and I'm not going to even capitalize on the idea that, yes, these elites caused an economic hardship for the entirety of the country, well, now the only answer that everyone wants to channel their energy to is a bad one, which is don't bail them out, which it should go to something a little more reasonable, which is, yeah, this was really bad. Let's regulate them. Let's, do something to make sure this never happens again. So the idea that we shouldn't be using populism, I think, is a understandable one when you see the worst ways this can manifest. But I think there are so many good ways that populism manifests, and there are just so many true populist narratives that we need to work with if we're going to build a coalition and beat MAGA. So, yeah.
Thank you for being here. I'm sure we'll get into it as we go. Lonerbox, welcome to the stream. Hi.
Hey, sorry I'm late.
You're fine, man. What do you got for us? Tell people who you are, what you do, what's your thoughts. Go ahead.
I'm Lonerbox. I sometimes do YouTube streaming, sometimes. Okay, I hate to be that guy who says, oh, it depends on what you mean by populism, but fact is, it depends on what you mean by populism. When I came in and I heard Ryan talking, oh, sorry, I was only halfway, maybe there was a background there, but it kind of sounded like just kind of any reference to us and them or people versus establishment could be classed as populism, and then putting it back to, I guess, Americans fighting against the English or whatever else. But like, to me, I don't really know if that's exactly how we understand populism or what we understand it to mean when we talk about it in the present context. I really find it hard to believe that although, in some cases, the people are in the right and they have a collective need and a collective discontent with an establishment that is rightful. For example, the protesters in Iran, but against their regime, but I would have a hard time calling these protesters, quite a lot of whom are actually monarchists in favor of the Shah or the Shah's son, calling themselves populists, even though they are the people, the collective will of the people against a corrupt and immoral establishment. But I don't think anyone would ever describe that movement as populist. So to me, the way I understand populism is that I see that being kind of a trait, but another thing that they seem to hold in common is this actual kind of quite clear opposition to liberal institutions and liberal status quo. That's why the populist left and the populist right often find themselves having a common enemy in the Democratic Party or in the Labour Party, as it was in the UK. And I think populist rhetoric, as in like, yeah, if you want to call like Bernie Sanders or even like a more moderate Democrat challenging the Trump elite and the way that he's just using the American institutions to enrich themselves, you can call that populist rhetoric if you want, but I don't think most populists would identify with their later goal, which is the idea that they want to restore these liberal institutions and to actually bring back rule of law and to stop it from being misused by the Trump administration. And I think giving in too much to this kind of like idea of populism in general, I think from what I've seen with populism, as it's generally understood, is that on the left or the right, is that it's a lot of bluster, a lot of simplification, a lot of raised expectations, and pretty much nothing when it comes to delivery. And we've just seen it recently with the situation with Keir Starmer resigning in the UK, in the sense that you've got this centre-left politician who has made a few legislative errors, but on the whole done like far better than his predecessors in the Conservative Party, and has actually interestingly appeased the populist left and right about as much as you possibly can within reason, whether it was on immigration or on Palestine for the left and right, respectively. But he got nothing for it, because ultimately the real thing that populists on either side here opposed was the thing that you can't really give up, which is like liberal institutions and some level of like rule of law and the liberal status quo. So I think that's kind of where the rift between populism and liberalism really shows more than the
Well,
rhetoric. Anyway,
let's talk about it. I think that, yeah. Well, let's just address what Lonerbox just said. I think first that populism necessarily is antithetical to liberal institutions. Is that a fair recitation of what you just said at the end
I,
there?
I I think that is gonna. I mean, obviously, we need to define this before we move on. But if the definition of populism necessitates anti-liberal institutions, then like obviously you can't be a liberal progressive, because it would be like, yeah, I'm a conservative liberal, right? Like these things are at odds with each other. I think it can, and there are plenty of examples of populism opposing liberal institutions and status quo. But if that's the only way that we're defining populism, then I think this like debate is kind of pointless. And if it's the I oppose it only when it opposes the status quo, then you're saying I don't like it when it's bad, which is kind of what we're saying too. I'm not really sure like how that's going to allow us to move the conversation forward if we're
well,
just saying.
sorry. To be
I
clear, when we
also,
talk about conservative liberals who have problems with institutions, are you talking like MAGA conservatives or just like your standard, like your like whatever is left
Well,
of
I
the
was just trying
center
to
right
use it as like
Republicans
it's an
in America?
oxymoronic ideology where like you can't really hold both of these positions if you're saying like the one necessitates opposition to the other.
Sure. I mean, you see, what you want to say, or we should be saying, is what ingredients are critical to defining populism that in themselves make it impossible to live alongside liberalism, right? At that point, then it's no longer just this self-referential thing where we're defining it by being bad, but it's actually, if we think of something as being bad because it doesn't live alongside liberalism, then it is bad, right? So, for example, the notion of pragmatism, right? Okay, you could say that populism doesn't a priori go against liberalism, but can it live alongside pragmatism, for example, which I would say is a key component of liberalism?
Well, I want to give it to Ryan. Ryan was trying to get in there. Go ahead.
I wanted to clarify something that Lonerbox said. Did you say that Bernie Sanders is or isn't a populist in your eyes?
Bernie Sanders is an odd one because when he's campaigning in primary season or whatever, he is quite populist when it comes to like his rhetoric towards the Democratic Party. But then he kind of like when it's Democrats versus Republicans, then he does is much more willing to make peace with the liberal establishment to some degree. But I would
Yeah,
maybe put him in a different camp from the likes of like someone like Morales, or on the right it would be like Farage or something like that. Yeah, I
Would
think
you
there's a bit
call
of a difference
Zoran
there.
Mamdani a populist?
Again, Zoran Mamdani is another example of someone who seems to have had much more populist rhetoric when he was campaigning. And from I don't know much about his current status, but it hasn't. Am I wrong in saying that Mamdani's been more of on a trajectory towards moderation and compromise, like with his whole the left wing populists having an issue with him in Hochul, or
Depends
like
on who you ask, I guess. Would you call
Yeah.
FDR a populist?
by today's definition? No.
I think that if you're excluding all of these people from your definition of populism, I think it's not a very useful definition of populism. I mean, any definition of populism that I saw come out of the post 2016 moment explicitly included like people like Bernie Sanders, just to make the point, and people like Jeremy Corbyn, to make the point that like there was this sort of broad-based populist swell kind of across the political spectrum. So I think whenever you're talking about this isn't a definition of populism that anyone would understand, I think your definition of populism is much too limited. I think if a definition of populism that doesn't include people like Bernie Sanders and FDR is a definition of
Well,
populism.
to be clear, it can involve Bernie Sanders quite easily, but would you not
Well,
also
I mean,
agree?
you
Well,
seem like you
say
weren't quite
for
sure about that.
for example, would you not say Bernie Sanders is a little bit different when he is on a primary like season when it comes to his rhetoric against the more moderate wing of the Democratic Party versus when he's going against the Republicans?
I think that Bernie Sanders and the millionaires and the billionaires rhetoric is classic left-wing populism. I think most people would include him in that category. Yeah, I don't think that's a hard one.
I mean, it's appealed to some
that's-
people, but do you not think that perhaps some of this populist rhetoric of Sanders may have actually held him back from a certain part of the voter base? He could have had the same policies,
Well,
but without the populist dressing, right?
Maybe so, but that's a different question. I mean, whether or not it's electorally effective is sort of a different question.
Well, I'm
from
appealing
whether
to
or
you on
not
this part,
it's
saying that
populist.
he's at least had some populist phases in some of his rhetoric and the way he's campaigned. But it also begs the question whether we should consider that actually successful in the long term. He doesn't seem to have had as much success as he could have done potentially, right?
Sorry, I mean, we can definitely talk about whether or not it's effective in a campaign, and that's an important discussion to have. But I think what we're talking about is whether or not populism is or is not compatible with liberalism.
Yeah, I want to answer your question, Loaderbox, because you're like, yeah, does he say more radical, more populist things during the primary? Absolutely, because he's trying to differentiate himself from the other candidates in the same way Zoran did, but the same way liberals will be like more gung ho on like healthcare. Like, you know, go back to the 2020 primary. How many liberals were all raising their hand for Medicare for all, for funding illegal immigrant healthcare, things like this? But like they obviously tone this down when they're in office. Like in the same way, Zoran is going to mediate a little bit and work with someone like Hochul, the same way Bernie Sanders is going to work with institutions when he thinks he needs to. That doesn't mean he's not a populist. And if your definition of populism is the more and most extreme things they've ever said, or the people who will never ever work with the system, then again, we're getting back to the like populism is just when it's the bad thing I don't like, which seems to kind of belie what Ryan and I are getting at, which is there's plenty of ways you can be populist and also work with systems and, you know, use both of these things without, rejecting the other.
And this
Well,
is
it's
sort
more
of the
that it's more that I think.
Well, one at a time. Let
populism to me
Ryan hold on. Just let Ryan finish up, and then we'll give it to Loaderbox. I promise.
Sorry, just to be clear, this is sort of the whole kind of thesis of my video, right? Which is that we are rightly afraid of the populist movements that have emerged in the post 2016 era. They've been bad in general. I mean, the Trump movement has been bad, but it's not bad because it is populist. It's bad because it's illiberal. And I think we've become afraid of populism when the fear should be illiberalism. And I think that there's plenty of historical examples to back up that liberalism and populism don't have to be incompatible. But I jumped in front of you there, Loaderbox. Please continue.
So is populism to you, does it just not include elements like disdain for institutions, like liberal institutions, or does it not include things like this constant appeal to the moral clarity of the common man versus like the faceless bureaucracy? Like, does that just not part
No,
of
it does.
populism to
It's
you,
just
or?
not. It's not a necessity, right? So if Bernie Sanders says, I think that the healthcare institutions are working against, your interest to get you universal healthcare. That's populism, right? But if he then says, and I don't think we should, destroy liberal bureaucracy in general to get it, like I think we can vote and get it and let it happen. That's also working with a liberal institution to work towards a populist idea. But these are like inherently contradictory, and he's not trying to like tear down the entire system, right? So yes, opposition to liberal institutions is part of populism. It's not a necessity, and that does. If it was a necessity, then necessarily liberals and progressives like literally could never work together, which I just don't think is the case.
I think I would
So
phrase it as opposition to the establishment. I think populism is generally an anti-establishment philosophy. I would say that that's not exactly to liberals' disadvantage right now. The establishment for the last 10 years, I mean, we can talk about the Biden interregnum, but the establishment for the last 10 years has been the graft and corruption of Trump. He's been the main character of politics for the last 10 years. He is the establishment. I think liberals would be right to take on an anti-establishment tone.
But you can
so are
define
the anti-establishment so the anti-establishment protesters in Iran, who are quite a lot of whom are pro-monarchy or pro the monarch, are they populist to you because they oppose a corrupt establishment on behalf of and claim to be the voice of the people?
I suppose they could be. It's like the protesters that wanted to depose the restored Bourbons in France after the defeat of Napoleon, and so they supported the citizen king Louis Philippe, right? So it would be a similar situation where that was a populist movement to install a monarchy against an absolutist regime. I see the similar thing happening.
And
I,
serving
I
our
imagine it would
intellectual,
be
Ryan. Wait. Let's tone it down for us dullards, right?
Mhm.
Okay, like Trump is a populist, right? Like the idea that these people are, hey, he's anti-deep state, and I'm going to elect him, and also I am okay with him subverting laws, doing dictatorial shit. Like they basically would be okay with this sort of right-wing king, and like might even be able to call them monarchists in certain scenarios. But like they're still populist, right? They're still using the us versus them. Only he can fix it. There's an establishment that doesn't care about you, and he's the one with all the answers, right? So like whether or not they support a
Yep.
theocracy versus liberal democracy is not whether or not they support
Yep.
populism. He is populist, but the bad part is not the populism there necessarily.
I
Okay, but
guess
that's why I'm asking you. Like, so it seems to be that you're saying the protesters in Iran and Trump are in a way they are just as populist by your definition, no? Like they're
It
both
could be.
populist.
Yeah, I would
Okay,
say
well, you keep saying they
that's
could be, but I think you're saying it could be because you know that if you ask the average like political commentator, do you think the protesters in Iran who want to depose the regime and bring back temporary rule of the Shah, they generally wouldn't call that populist, though, would they?
I
I'm
don't
just
know
wondering
enough
why you
about the
think that's the
Iran
case.
protesters to say whether or not they should be called populist. I would say that there's nothing inherently incompatible about opposing an absolutist regime with a monarch and calling that populist. That's an absolutely compatible thing. That was what the French did in the Revolution of 1830.
I mean, but Ryan, you're using the term establishment here. I mean, do you not think this is a pretty vague concept that can just be imprinted on a whole host of institutions, on sectors of society, billionaires, for example, and use that as a proxy?
Populism is a vague concept, but I'm not just pulling that out of thin air. Merriam-Webster defines populism as a political philosophy or movement that represents or is claimed to represent the interest of ordinary people, especially against the establishment. I mean, I think that this is sort of a problem with populism as an ideology, right?
Well, I mean, if you look at,
it in fact is not
there's
an ideology.
there's more details if you read the studies on populism than that, right? I mean, for one, it's not just about victims; it's about perpetrators. And it becomes this narrative. That's where the us and them narrative comes from. There has to be a them as well, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
and so the them is sometimes the establishment. It's sometimes scientists if you're on, anti-vaxxers on the right and that kind of thing. But
And sometimes it's the economic royalists oppressing the people in the Great Depression, or sometimes it's the slave power controlling the federal government and expanding slavery
yeah, sure,
out
but
west. Sometimes it's the crown oppressing the colonial subjects in the American colonies.
but you can also reflect on that. This is also that's a reaction to a natural situation that's going on. So a narrative builds up, and you start to realize, okay,
Exactly.
yeah. But sometimes you have this narrative built upon really vague and loose foundations, loose definitions, and then you start to fit all your policy, all your argument into that narrative, and so you start to work backwards from the conclusion. Do you not think this is also an aspect of popularism, that they just create this framework for the world and then they just start imprinting it everywhere that they can?
It can be. Well, let me answer this by saying, what do we do if there actually is a corrupt elite establishment hurting the country? because I think that's what we have right now. We have a corrupt establishment in the Trump administration and all his supporters in the big business and media that are hurting the country. I think that is a fact, I would say. How do we talk about that then?
We talk about the system that created them in the first place, right? They're just as much of a symptom as they are the problem. And if we forget that they're a symptom, then we're not really dealing with the illness properly.
Symptom of
We're
what?
just putting some cream over a rash we have on our skin. It's a symptom. I mean, it's a symptom of something really complex, and it's a complex problem to deal with. It's why people are going to be super unhappy if populists get into power. Why? Because they suggest simple solutions for complex problems. And the simple solution that you just get rid of these people one day and you have a wealth tax, whatever simple solution you want, and you solve the problems that way, people are going to be super disappointed. Why? Because the problems are structural. They're to do with a system that needs to be more dynamic, reflect the fact we live in an era of social networks and not old printed newspapers, which is another aspect of populist rhetoric that increases polarization far more today than it ever did in the past. That's why we can look at some populist things that FDR might have said and say, well, okay, but that wasn't amplified through a viral post in the end, right? So we have to think about...
Can I just interject and say, I think whenever people talk, there are new challenges that are posed by social media, but I think whenever people talk about the unique danger of like the amplifying effects of social media, I think it would behoove people to go back and read what some of those newspapers were actually printing. I mean, the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror was spurred on by self-printed political pamphlets, right? We've lived in an age of sort of democratic media before. In a lot of ways, that era of like the monoculture in the mid 20th centuries was the anomaly rather than the norm. So I just want to say, if we're depending on that sort of monoculture to maintain liberal democracy, I think we better figure out how to move beyond that.
Oh, I agree. But do you not think it's a bit of an issue if we just start talking about these elites, including like the genuine symptoms of a serious problem, that being Trump and cronies like Farage, right? Which we share, and we agree this is a big problem. But if we just start treating it as like the key thing, we get rid of that and everything goes back to hunky-dory, that we might find ourselves pretty disappointed because new Farages, new Trumps emerge because we haven't looked at systemic problems because they're complex and we had a simple solution.
So you're absolutely right. We should not talk about getting rid of these guys and everything goes back to hunky-dory. But that's also not what liberal populists have proposed in the past. We can talk about Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, where he promises a new birth of freedom, not a return to the old freedom, right?
But I'm not talking about the past, I'm talking about today.
Well,
right?
It's a different
time, right?
It's a different time, but it's the same ideology. And we're having a discussion on whether or not liberalism is compatible with populism. My contention is that liberalism has historically and remains today compatible with populist rhetoric. I think it's totally fair to cite historical examples of liberalism and populism existing in harmony to make that point. You disagree?
Yeah, I disagree. As I say, it goes back to the pragmatic kind of dynamic approach of liberalism, right? Let me see if I can find my quote. Well, one quote from FDR I wanted to quote. If I can find my things here, right? So, for example, he said, "If it fails, admit it frankly and try another. But above all, try something." So he was very much pro-pragmatism. I mean, we can, quote him out of context, but the fact is that you have to look at the general length of time that a politician has been in power. FDR was very much a pragmatist. I'm sure you'd agree with this. And pragmatism goes completely against these notions of populism. I'm sure you would agree that populism at least sometimes oversimplifies.
You would disagree that
but you're baking it.
Hold on. One at a time.
Well, I just want to say, Reason, you're baking it into the definition. Like, populism necessarily is when they do it too simple and stupid, which is like, yeah, if that is the distinguishing factor between a populist and a pragmatist, then by definition, populism is bad and we shouldn't do it. But what Ryan and I are contending is that no, populism can and does, we'll admit, offer simple solutions to complex problems, which will cause brain rot. We don't like this, but can also say, hey, here's the issue, but I'm not going to say exactly how I'm going to solve it. Like saying we need to fix healthcare is not a simple solution. It's a populist answer to we need to do something
that's
about
not
this.
populism,
and then you can have
you would seriously say that FDR is not a populist.
I'd say some of his rhetoric was bordering on populist. I would say, and as I said before, and this is a subtle importance here, he was responding to a situation and built a narrative around it. Populism, from what I see, maybe it can be a reaction to something of yesteryear where there was a reason to build a narrative, but it clings on to that narrative for all its life and then plants it everywhere and just keeps doing that, even when it doesn't really fit, when there's something more complex. For example,
So can I tell you a problem that I'm having here? So I'm trying to give some historical examples of liberalism and populism coexisting, right? But we've rejected the idea of turning to history because that's not pragmatic. But at the same
no, I didn't
time,
say
I
that.
feel like these. Well,
Let him
that
finish,
is.
then you can respond. I promise.
Well,
Go
no,
ahead.
no. I mean, if that's not what you mean, I mean that's what I took you to mean.
I mean, the only reason, but there's two issues with looking back in history. Firstly, even if it worked then, it may not work now. And secondly, in the case of FDR, there's plenty of
Hold on, they're
examples.
not. Just to be clear, what I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, or a mischaracterizing you. But what Ryan is trying to say is that even like whether it's effective is another question, but at least in the instance of FDR, his claim is that FDR was a liberal and a populist both, and therefore, at least on some level, they can work together. Whether it works or not, right? Whether it's pragmatically efficient or not, isn't what he's trying to get at. Is that a fair characterization of what you
Yeah,
just?
no, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly
Your
right.
video was very clear and concise, and I appreciated that. And one aspect you did with regards to FDR is you put it in context of this crazy rise of fascism, and the whole economic situation in which the US was in at the time. And this is my point, that the narrative developed out of a genuine context rather than, if FDR was still having this narrative, in the 60s or another time, then I would have said he was populist because he held on to that narrative and just continued with it. It's perpetual us and them victimization. And victimization is a key part of populist rhetoric. It's another thing. It's not because some of the description here has been oversimplified. I'd agree. We shouldn't go to the point of just saying, well, it's describing it as a bad thing and therefore it's bad. That's silly.
Yeah.
But there are certain ingredients to it, like oversimplifying problems, or certainly we could say simplifying problems, that then start to appeal to its weaknesses. I mean, you'd agree that simplification is part of the process of populist narrative, right?
For sure, simplification is part of populism. Simplification is not always bad, though. Simplification can be a good thing. But well, no, sorry, I'm not trying to accuse you of saying that. But I hate to quiz some.
Would you say like defaulting to a corrupt establishment or a corrupt conspiracy, almost like a conspiratorial like explanation for a problem? Would you say that's like quite a populist tendency?
If you'll, I hate to. Can I put a pin in that for just a second and ask?
Yeah.
Sorry, my bad. I do want to get to that. I hate to quiz y'all too much about like American politics, but you mentioned like the 60s. Like, would you consider Lyndon Johnson to be a populist if you know anything about him?
What, Civil Rights Act and saying the N-word in private? No, I don't know. In which way?
Well, I mean, with the Great Society, with the war on poverty,
I don't think that's populist, no.
declaring a war on poverty, you don't think that's a populist thing
That's
to
a
do?
stretch.
I don't know.
So.
I'm not. I still don't know exactly what your definition of populism
Yeah,
is.
well,
It
just
sounds
for
very
my edification, can you
broad.
explain what makes that populist, Ryan?
Well, real quick, Ryan, like the FDR thing, like if we're like specifically baking in the elites versus common people, he literally talks about the common working people. He talked about like the economic royals. Like to say anything but he's a populist, I think is ridiculous. I don't know as much about LBJ, but like, does he
Yeah.
have that sort of like us versus them stuff when he did War on Poverty?
I mean, yeah, for sure, but it's not super relevant. I want to get to what Lunderbox is saying.
No, but just to correct something that you're saying, so I don't think anyone would deny, and I've read this from a few people who whatever political scientists talk about populism. They'll talk about populist rhetoric, which is obviously employing that kind of those kind of speech patterns when you're dealing with a situation where there actually sometimes is a very powerful group that is like fucking over our large swathe of the population. But I don't really ever see populism as meaning like just people versus establishment, or like I think there is generally like it's like the whole thing about how you define what a game is, right? And how there are all these different variables that can sometimes come and go depending on what game you're talking about. But I think it's the same with populism. Like a populist isn't just someone who is people versus establishment or us versus them. It also usually, but not always for each different category, will have some kind of constellation of traits, whether that is a constant like moralizing around the people versus like the morally corrupt elite, or whether it's oversimplifying problems and like defaulting or like very much veering or being biased towards conspiratorial explanations for why there are certain problems, or especially the way they define their political opponents as enemies of the people as well. That's why that's why I'll come back to the same thing. There's a reason that generally protesters against the regime in Iran or like people in Tiananmen Square were typically not described as populists, even though they were very people versus elite, right?
Was that a soy pill?
No, is that just to me? Sorry, I didn't
Yeah,
know if Ryan wanted
yeah.
to go right away. I mean, no, I
Okay.
understand this, but again, it seems like you're baking in more stuff that I don't like that is very common with populism and saying it's not populism unless it contains this. And I just don't think, I don't know, I feel like that's a proprietary
Well, I
definition of
think it
like,
just needs like again, there's not going to be you're not going to get like a perfect time of like how many of these traits or in what quantity do you need to call this populist. But like, okay, if I asked everyone in the panel right now, when Mamdani says, I like the bus system. I think it should be we should tax the rich to make it free. That's one. Okay, that's one position. And then the second position is when he's a few years back saying that when the boots of the IDF are on of the when the boots of the NYPD are on your neck, that boot has been laced by the IDF. Which of these two positions do you think are more populist?
I don't know if you can quantify either of those as more or less populist. I mean, one is saying I want to tax rich elites to pay for the common person, which is populist, and the other is saying, hey, the establishment is using other governments to train their things in ways that come down on you, the common person, and this is bad. Like I think both of these are
Okay.
populist
And
rhetorics,
if someone told me to choose one over the other or to say which one is more populist, I would probably say that the bus thing would probably fall more neatly under something like a social democratic or a democratic socialist position. Whereas the thing about the boots of the NYPD, in terms of its rhetorical flourish, in terms of its conspiracism, and in terms of its like appealing to this vague idea of like corrupt goings on behind the scene, like that sounds more populist to me. Like, but that's why
well,
where I kind
maybe
of
I'm
draw
You
the
made
less
an
difference.
interesting.
familiar
You
with
said
that.
something interesting there to me. I
Go ahead.
think whenever you talked about populism as juxtaposed with like social democracy or democratic socialism, whenever I'm thinking about populism, and I think this is fairly well accepted. I don't think populism is in and of itself an ideology. Populism is to some extent a style of politics. This is why we can have
Does
left wing.
everyone agree with this? I think this is important to actually get people to either agree or disagree with because I think they'll be important. Does
I
everyone agree with that? Agree with that statement that it's not so much an ideology, but a rhetorical flourish?
It's not
can,
just a rhetorical style, but it's a style of politics. It's not
Fair. Okay.
just the rhetoric, but it's the whole style of
in
politics.
short, I
It's the
disagree.
reason why you can
Actually,
have
so
conservative, liberal, like left wing, right wing populists. Like there's no like coherent. Oh, it's the group of populists because these people are going to have completely different prescriptions and policies and ways of attacking and what problems they're even talking about. Like Trump is talking about the FBI is corrupt and doesn't care about you. This is not a populist left wing thing. This is specifically for him and saying like this is why nothing ever gets done in Washington. Left wing
Whereas Bernie
populism is going to be
Sanders is,
about
blaming the millionaires and the billionaires and so
right.
on and
Yeah.
so forth.
I agree that it's not
And the trillionaires.
I agree it's not an
Oh, yeah.
ideology in
Not
itself,
anymore.
but it's not just rhetoric either. The nature of because it defines this narrative, and this narrative then forces certain policy positions, and so it polarizes and extremizes the policy of the parties that embrace popularism. So it's rather than a broad range of policies, it has a very simplistic view of what needs to be implemented, and it focuses on implementing that, and it's just interested in that. It's like the Green Party in the UK doesn't talk about green policy anymore. It's just interested in wealth taxes and things along those lines. It may talk
Do you
about a few
think
other things,
whenever?
but it mainly
Oh, sorry,
focuses
my
on.
bad, my bad.
No, sorry, Ryan, go.
Do you think whenever John Ossoff talks about like this is a government of, by, and for the Epstein class, and this is the most corrupt administration that we've ever had, and it's a government of, by, and for the millionaires and the billionaires, do you think that's unacceptably populist?
No, I think that goes into exactly what Lonerbox was pointing at. There's a really good paper called The Populist Zeitgeist by Muda. And he emphasizes that you can liberal movements can still take on occasionally populist rhetoric, but it doesn't make it populist. And that goes back to, I mean, I agree with Soipo's point that he's made twice now, that we should be careful about just boxing it into a definition in which it can't help but be bad. But at the same time, we have to be careful about leaving that box too open and having this very vague concept which just everything can be populist, right? And I think one of those
Well,
key...
no, I don't think anything. I don't think everything can be populist, but I think populism is about alleging to represent the interests of the common man against corrupt establishment, elite, so on and so forth. How you define those things, how you define the common man, and how you define the elite or the establishment is what makes the difference between left-wing, right-wing, or liberal populism.
It's a victimhood, and there's a perpetrator. It's not some natural disaster, but there's actually a perpetrator. So these are key ingredients, right?
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
and within that narrative, do you not think that populist movements at least tend to, maybe it's again about a collection of properties and that everyone has that property. I think that was a great kind of Wittgensteinian approach of learner boxes just then. Do you not think that often that narrative then starts to define policy and the way the world is seen within that movement, rather than looking at how the world is and then being dynamic in the approach of realigning that narrative to fit when circumstances change? Do you not think there's a lack of dynamism there among populist movements to change that framing?
Could you give an example, maybe?
Well, not to appear. Well, we can look at. It's easier on the right because we have far more right-wing populist movements, right? That, for example, when immigration levels change in the UK, they still complain. They'll just start lying through their teeth because they can't admit to the change of the reality. So they have this narrative, and so they now have to start fitting with what little possibilities they have. How there's still this amazing flood of migrants, even though it's starting to go towards record lows. It goes below the number that's economically optimal for the UK, but they don't talk about that. They just find more excuses to fit that view.
Right.
Reason.
Why would you
put
this? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. Can I give an American example? Maybe because fuck British politics. Who cares? Tell me if this is what you mean.
True and base.
AOC running as a populist, very much an us versus them. Elites don't care. Billionaires, very much Bernie rhetoric. And as she gets into office and has not, solved all the issues that she campaigns on. Obviously, she's one House member, but like there are a degree of the left wing populist movements that are turning against her because they're like, oh, you're too establishment now. You didn't solve all these things. Your easy answers or easy, solutions that you profess didn't solve everything. And so this kind of like has poisoned their brains into thinking now this person's not good, they're against me. And that's like the danger of the populist like rhetoric in general, how these things like get co-opted into turning otherwise populist people into bad guys. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Well, that was my initial point about the kind of, I'd call this sugar rush politics, where you say something and you have a kind of a framework that's really, really appealing, and you get a very strong support. They're often very vocal, so they sound bigger than they are in terms of numbers. But then they get unhappy later on. Either you're in power and you try and implement things and things don't work out, or it's just unsustainable, or you realize that there needs to be pragmatism in your politics. I think the change in AOC is absolutely fantastic, and she's becoming a great politician. But yeah, I think part of the problem was actually she relied upon populist rhetoric to gain an audience at the beginning, and that's now become quite negative for her in the longer term. I think she could have done better if she hadn't appealed to it so much to start off with.
You think she would have been able to win that primary originally in 2018 if she didn't run as a populist?
There's a whole host
to unseat the Democratic whip, I think.
And we have to be careful with history, trying to frame it as some science experiment where we can change one variable and then say, oh, what would have happened otherwise, right? In either way, right? I mean, but I would say that there's a whole host of people who would have voted for her if she wasn't so populist. And they're a lot less vocal because populism is a bit like being at a football stadium. Everyone really likes to cheer when populism's going on. But other people like watching other things a little bit more subdued, and you just don't hear them so much. This is why populist movements can seem really, really powerful, because a lot of them are, saying how wonderful the movements are, but when it comes to voting time, a lot of them disappoint at the ballot box. Not always, right?
Well, yeah, but she won as a populist, so that's not
yeah,
really...
I mean, this is the point that
I'm saying. But I would completely support that approach. So I think Democrat politicians, maybe that is their answer, is just be a populist for the ballot box, and then once you get into office, disappoint all your populist voters and actually just do a decent job as a politician.
So hold on,
but she's not a populist
anymore. Your advocacy here is just to lie to the public.
It's not even lying, because okay, maybe a more serious point. The thing you said about populism, whether or not it's an ideology, in a sense, it's not really, because it doesn't actually have, like, in a vacuum, it clearly doesn't have like a clear opinion on like what the economic or political system should look like. That's why you've got populist left and populist right with completely different views on what society should look like. But I think they do have very, again, much more predictable, like default answers to problems, which is why, like, if I was talking about like a center right person or just a right winger versus a populist right, they say they were trying to explain why the grooming gangs thing happened. Well, a right winger would say, oh, it's just like it's a political correctness gone mad or something like that. Whereas a populist is much more likely to say, well, it's like a liberal self-hating elite is like spreading this ideology so they can import the migrants and protect them because that's their vote. Like, it's much more conspiratorial and it's much more like hitting at the institutional level. And I think that's maybe why, to come back to your question about was it Ossoff talking about Trump being like a establishment
Epstein
of
class,
the
yeah.
the Epstein, but like again, and maybe I'm just going off of instinct here, but instinctively, I think a populist is the kind of person who would say that, but say also the Democratic establishment is a problem as well. Whereas I see someone like Ossoff who's clearly trying to replace that like Trump establishment with a Democratic establishment and is fine with the Democratic establishment to at least to a degree that a populist wouldn't be satisfied with. But I don't know if either of you would disagree with that.
I mean, I would
would-
disagree. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. So I've been talking
No,
too
Ryan.
No, I'll go
Ryan,
real quick
you
and
have
then
something
to you.
actually to say. Soy Pill can wait his turn.
No,
Okay.
no. I
Go
mean,
ahead, Ryan.
I would disagree that a populist is necessarily against the establishment of both parties. I mean, I don't think that's a necessary component. You have to frame your political project as against some kind of establishment and representing the common people against some kind of establishment. But I don't think it's necessarily. I think that's the key thing. I don't think that there's anything about populism that requires you to be against the establishment of both parties.
Would you say someone who is
Though
like
that
John
could be.
Ossoff?
So,
Well, yeah, but say John Ossoff using his rhetoric against the MAGA. Is he more or less populist than someone like Kalinske? And like, and
Yeah,
why
less
is
because Kalinske
yeah.
is going to have more, like, encompass more people in
Kyle
what the elites
Kalinske, the
are,
political
right?
person,
Yeah,
the
yeah, Kyle
commentator.
Yeah,
Kalinske,
The
yeah.
one who
Oh, I thought we were
stole
talking about a
my meme.
politician. I was.
Okay, this motherfucker, and I'm not kidding. I made a little meme about the reflecting pool in Washington, and I made a little AI thing with JD Vance and being the monster and it being
Oh,
Elden
you
Ring.
made that?
Yes, he stole it.
You typed a sentence into a
Yes,
prompt machine?
yes,
That's
I
crazy.
generated that. Okay, and look, he stole it. He just took it. He didn't even like it. He didn't even retweet it. Anyway, sorry, motherfucker, the elite Kyle Kalinske stealing from the common tweeter Whick. Okay, never mind. Go ahead,
Sorry,
please. Sorry.
I was losing my mind. I thought you were talking about another senator there for a second. I was like, Kalinske. Who are
No,
we
Kyle
talking about?
Kalinske, the secular talk. Yeah.
No,
But yeah,
okay,
refocusing,
sorry.
yeah, I would agree with you, Loner. Like, obviously, Kyle is more populist, or he goes further with his populism than Ossoff because he is anti-establishment in general. He'll talk about the Epstein class, but he'll also say, and Democrats are corrupt and they don't want you to get what you want. They'll vote against your interests, right? So, like, he takes it to a larger degree. Yeah.
Because it's a much more essential part of his worldview. I feel like people like Kalinske kind of need a corrupt elite establishment somewhere to basically spread. Like, I feel like their worldview is just it depends on that. It's like, and if they can't find one, then we're gonna find one. We're gonna put something in that box before we start the next video. Whereas for someone like Ossoff, it's like I don't think they need that. They it's more that they encounter it and they respond to it.
Well, this is exactly my point about the order here.
Well, that's exactly the point that I've been trying to make as well, which is that right now the situation, I think, demands a somewhat
But that's not
populist description of reality. I
okay.
think
But
I think
if you agree with
reality right
Lonerbox,
now-
then that's not popularism. That's kind of what you're pointing out, right? Isn't it, Loner?
I'm trying to figure out what your what you would say the difference is between populism and pluralism.
Populism and pluralism.
Yeah,
I'm not
which
sure
is
these are
like
necessarily orthogonal. Like, I'm not sure these are necessarily contradictory things.
do you think they're
Pluralism.
just synonymous or?
No, pluralism.
No, he's
is,
saying that
is
they're not
defending-
necessarily incompatible, but they're two separate things.
Yeah, they're two
Okay.
separate things. But pluralism is like the defense of many different groups in society, the ability for many different groups in society to exist kind of side by side. The Federalist Papers, they make an argument for pluralism, respecting the different religious faiths of people, allowing a multiplicity of different factions to make ambition counter ambition. That's pluralism. But I don't see that as incompatible or really even related necessarily to populism.
Yeah, that's why I was asking what, like, not so much whether or not they're incompatible, but what you would say the distinction is between them. But I mean,
well, I guess to me, it's sort of like an apples and oranges thing. I mean, it's sort of like asking me what the difference is between the color red and like the Washington Monument.
Okay. What if I asked you? Trying to think. Okay. If someone said like, would you say anti-authoritarians? Is it possible to be anti-authoritarian but not populist?
To be anti-authoritarian but not populist?
Yeah. To oppose
Sure.
like an
I
authoritarian
think a
regime
lot
without
of
being
I
populist.
think a
Yeah.
lot of the Democratic Party right now is anti-authoritarian but not populist.
Okay.
Like I think someone like Derek Thompson, the political commentator, co-author of Abundance, he's someone that I would consider anti-authoritarian but not populist. He's like very technocratic.
Why isn't that
Yeah, he's
enough?
like strictly anti-populist too. Like
Sorry?
he's like strictly anti-populist. Like
Yeah,
in the example you give in
he
his in your video, yeah, with his
yeah,
quotes.
he defines himself as not populist, like
So
explicitly.
why isn't that enough of a narrative? Why do we have to have, I mean, the missing ingredient here seems to be that populism has this very strong emphasis on a definition of an establishment and does not change that, is not dynamic to that as time moves forward. You're saying that there's an anti-authoritarian, you could be anti-authoritarian, so you have this this perpetrator, shall we say, the authoritarian perpetrator, which we can argue that Trump's got elements of that right now, but you don't have to be populist to have that as part of your narrative. You're saying that that is possible.
I'm sorry, I was reading a super chat. I
Okay.
missed the latter half of that. My bad.
I'm saying that you agree that you can be anti-authoritarian and not populist.
You can be anti-authoritarian and not populist. Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
Okay.
I think that's a lot of the Democratic Party right now.
Okay.
This abundance guy you mentioned, it was because of like he was more of a technocrat.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just to be clear,
I think that's a fair way to describe. I'm not trying to
Well,
deride
not
it.
just
no,
that.
yeah.
Well, not just that, Loner. It's also like if you look at what he's criticizing in our current government, it's not a bunch of elites are stopping us from progressing. It's hey, there's bloated inefficiency here that is restricting research and progress. And if we make these reforms or if we pass certain push-pull incentive laws, we will get more things done. And that's
Yeah,
not saying,
yeah.
oh, this guy's holding it back, right? But then when he does talk about Trump, it's hey, I don't like that Trump's getting all this power. It's not corrupt elites are holding back society necessarily, although he might say that there are certain aspects of that in Trump's movement, which is just like true, right? But he's not saying that's the reason things aren't good. He's saying the reason things
I'm
aren't good is because
guessing-
we're focused in the wrong direction.
But I'm guessing if push came to shove and you asked this person, like, do you think the Trump administration and all his crony friends like are a corrupt elite that is holding progress back? Would they say yes or no to that?
Yeah,
I
they
don't think
would,
he-
but that's not how he defines like how to fix these things, right? Like he would say,
I think Derek Thompson
So
specifically
if you
would
so your
say-
definition of how to fix things does inform whether or not you're a populist.
part of it, yeah, for sure. But
So
sorry,
it is
Ryan,
so with that
you were,
so is it possible to have that because earlier it felt like we were reluctant to call it an ideology, but it seems like if it's an ideology, if you're identifying like the causes of problems and how to fix them, like in politics, wouldn't that be part of like an ideology or?
sort of.
Well-
but what I'm saying, sorry, Ryan.
Well,
It's
you
not,
were
a,
Ryan
about to
it's
go.
not
Go
a
ahead.
complete ideology. It's not a complete ideology for sure. I mean, populism implies something about the way that you act as a political figure. It's not a meaningless term, but it's a. I've seen populism called a thin ideology before.
Thin
It's-
centered, yeah.
Yeah. And so it can be applied to a lot of things. Maybe well, anyway. So I sort of interrupted you.
Yeah, it's fine. Basically, like, yeah, him identifying that there are elite people that are against the common good isn't like that's populist in and of itself, but he would not describe this is the reason things are bad right now, right? He would say, like, he would have released Abundance 20 years ago before Trump was ever in office and said, like, these are the things we need to fix. This is like a supplemental thing that's on top of it. That's like, okay, yeah, maybe this is populist rhetoric to address the current administration and what it's doing. But I don't think that he would define himself as a populist because this is not prescriptively how he views the world, right?
Well, and
So-
he definitely, I've consumed a lot of his content. He's definitely before said that he rejects basically any narrativization of politics. You know, he doesn't like really any of it. And he's called it childish before to give like a narrative to politics. He's talked about how it's basically inherently lying to talk about like the elites or the establishment in this way. So I think he would be deeply uncomfortable. I think if push came to shove and he was forced to choose between that sort of rhetoric and like, I don't know, like a national conservative Trump type figure, I think he would choose the sort of liberal populist figure, but I don't think it would be his first choice. That's for sure.
So maybe to ask us a couple more simple questions just to make sure I know exactly where we're coming from. So when Bernie Sanders says we should have universal health care and we don't because the billionaire class is like interfering with allowing the common people to have their true will like realized or whatever the fuck he says, like would you say that that's like a good example of Bernie Sanders like doing the populist thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And
Yeah.
whereas when he says vote for Biden to keep Trump out because Trump's a threat to democracy, would you say that's equally populist or less populist or more?
Way less. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's less. Talking about how he's a threat to democracy, I think is a little populist, but it's sort of a little populist. It's not nearly as populist as like the other thing about healthcare.
What if he said he's a threat to
Hold
our
on,
democratic
now I have a
institutions?
question.
Would that be
Oh, go ahead,
populist?
finish Lunderbox. Yeah.
No, well, so little that it's probably negligible. But talking about how Trump is a threat to democracy or calling Trump a fascist or an authoritarian, inherent in that is this guy is trying to take away your voice, your democratic voice. So I think that can be framed in a populist way, but I think the way that you framed it there, talking about like he's a threat to our institutions, no, that's not populist.
Even if there was, yeah, okay. What do you think about that, Soy Pill?
No, similarly, yeah, like if you're like, hey, you are the people who should be deciding, and instead this guy wants to come up and tell you that your voice doesn't matter. He wants to steal the election. That's like a populist framing of Trump's, like draconian sort of policies. But you can just say like, hey, this guy's trying to subvert the Electoral Count Act, and that's bad. Like that's the
That's
same
not really
thing,
populist.
but it's not really a populist framing, and you're not like pushing this as a populist thing to capitalize on people's anger. You're just like, hey, this guy broke the law, isn't that bad? Like that, these things are the same point, but they are, one is framing it populist, one is not, which is why
Or
it's
if they
not
say
really...
it's like a core American value, or it's like a part of
Yeah,
this
or
country's
yeah,
history, or
appealing to the status quo rather than saying it's because of an elite. Like you're attacking the exact same problem without making it populist.
Wait a minute.
Well, this is why I'm
It's a good
circling back to
example.
the. This
So
is
I just want
just
clarity
to.
from
Wait,
sorry.
Let Loner finish. Let Loner finish because
yeah, I'm just finishing off the. I'm just finishing off the thought because I'm basically just circling back to the idea that like, this is why I think populism, at least like, or it seems to be the more populist you are, then the more you are going to be opposed to like like liberal institutions typically. And when you're not doing that, then you're just
Well, in
being a
that
bit less
example,
populist.
if we're talking about the liberal institution of democracy, like, hey, everyone should have a voice, that's a liberal idea. This is populism by saying this elite is trying to subvert the institution that gives you all the voice. I don't think that's a opposition to the liberal institution. And it's not saying, hey, we need to come in and have like a direct democracy, or we need to come in and do some like extra super populist sort of like voting system to get over this. It's very much a, hey, here's a populist framing of defense of a liberal institution. And so I don't think that like necessarily by becoming more populist in that framing, which we agreed was the same concept, the same problem being attacked by different views, has now made this one more anti-status quo, really.
Yeah, this is why I'm just not sure about this understanding, because that sounds like if saying it. Did you just to clarify? Did you say that someone who states the idea that everyone should have a voice, that's a populist idea?
If you're framing it as by subverting this election, this elite, he's corrupting the status quo. He is taking this institution and subverting it to take away your voice. I think that is, yes, populist.
Okay,
Yeah,
but the idea in and of itself, if you live in a monarchy and you're saying we want one person, one vote, this is not populism, or it is?
No, I think if you live in a monarchy, you are agitating against the establishment by saying one person, one vote. I mean, presuming a real monarchy here, not like a British style like constitutional monarchy. But saying one person, one vote in the 1820s in I don't know, Germany, like yeah, I would say that's a pretty populist thing. In fact, that would have been radical back then. Talking about giving women the right to vote and such.
Would it be populist for a historian just to simply state, well, Trump in the past has tried to steal an election, so I think he's going to steal an election in the future? Is that populist?
For a historian to just say that?
Well, yeah, based upon a historical precedent, just simply pointing out as a matter of fact that they think it's a likely trend that someone would do this. Is that populist?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
I don't think a historian catalog. Well, I don't think someone saying Trump tried to steal an election
and therefore will steal an
necessarily
election in the future. Yeah, but I mean, I'm making projections, right?
Well, I think that depending on how it's framed, very well may be populist. You could imagine a politician saying Trump tried to steal an election and he is going to try and steal an election again.
But is it
And
necessarily
I think
populist? Not that
way-
it could be populist, but is it necessarily populist?
Yeah, Ryan, it's definitely not necessarily right, because you and I would
No,
agree. Most of the
it's not
Democrats fighting
necessarily
against and using this rhetoric are not like populist Democrats.
Okay.
They're just saying like, "Hey, Trump's bad. Let's stop him." Right.
We're,
So
we're
I would-
circling a, we're circling a bit. I do need to make a little money. Let me read some of these super chats, and then we'll kind of get back into it. I have a question for Ryan and Soy Pill, and then I have a question for Lona Box and Reason. But let me read. There's just a couple. $5 from my listening library to say FDR crawled so Bernie could walk, so Zoran could run, so the next one can run us off the side of a mountain. Love the
Is that
content and the cast. Well, thank
is
you
that
for
a
the
wheelchair
$5.
joke?
Hmm?
So ask him if that's a wheelchair joke.
Is that a wheelchair joke, my listening library? Pay me money and to answer your question. I don't know. Ratman42 says for $10 says populism is just a tactic. It's the post-truth nature of the populism that matters. If you give up on the cohesiveness of the narrative / lies, it depoliticizes people and derails discourse. Do we agree, disagree? What do we think?
I think the way I understand that, I agree. Could you read the beginning of that again? Populism is a tactic.
Populism is just a tactic. It's the post-truth nature of the populism that matters. If you give up on the cohesiveness of the narrative / lies, it depoliticizes people and derails discourse.
I would frame it slightly differently. I would say that the post-truth nature of it is a problem, but that's sort of a larger problem. I would say that the inherent problem of the populism that we see now is the illiberalism of it. And sort of the core argument that I think we're making is that populism and liberalism are not inherently incompatible. But I would agree that populism is a tactic primarily.
Fair enough. $2 from Greg Yo. AOC has a populist heart and a liberal brain. Thank you for that $2, I suppose. And then $5 from the Justice 35 to say Obama. Okay.
Can I actually make
go
a I think AOC, I give all the elected Democratic socialists the benefit of the doubt whenever they say that they're socialists. You know, I think that that's fair to take them at their word on that one. If you're going to take the hit and call yourself a socialist in American politics, I think you probably are. You probably consider yourself a socialist. Now, democratic socialism is not inherently incompatible with liberal democracy. So I think that's a distinction I want to make. But I think one of the reason I'm doing this is because we used to have left-wing Democrats in the United States who would talk in very similar ways to the way that Bernie talks, to the way that AOC talks. Before Bernie was talking about Medicare for all and a nationalized healthcare system, we had Ted Kennedy was talking about, as awful as he was as a person, he was talking about nationalized healthcare back in like the 80s. And I think the disappearance of that sort of openly like New Deal redistributionist wing of the liberals in the Democratic Party is part of the reason why there's so much demand for democratic socialist politicians.
But and that kind of leads to my question. I'll get to the other super chats later. Don't worry, gang. I'll get you guys. But that does lead to my question for your side. Like bringing up FDR, and we can point to the New Deal, but you also have to realize he also engaged in one of the most horrific acts that we have seen in America in the modern era, the Japanese internment camps, right? Would you say that FDR bringing up internment camps means that FDR means that liberalism and internment camps are compatible? I would disagree with you if that's your point, right? So I guess the argument that FDR did this, so it must be compatible with liberalism. Square that circle for me.
Well, it's not just
wait,
FDR.
Ryan, please, before you answer, Wick, Obama had kids in cages. That's liberal. He was a liberal. Are you saying he's not a liberal because he did that? Like, this is silly.
I think
This is a silly point.
that was an illiberal act done by someone who is otherwise liberal.
Okay,
I think
and
what
you
I
could
would
say the
say-
same thing about FDR. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
You can. I think the difference is. Sorry, I had to burp there. I think the difference is you can look at lots of different eras in which liberalism was ascendant in the United States. We can look at and I know we don't love to talk about history too much, and I respect that opinion, but we can look at the American Revolution and we can see populist rhetoric. We can look at the lead up to the Civil War and we can see populist rhetoric. We can look at the New Deal, we can see populist rhetoric. We can look at the Civil Rights Movement, we can see populist rhetoric. I think populism as a tactic for pushing an expansion of freedom against an elite that's depriving people of freedom is part and parcel of the history of liberalism. And I would say that internment camps are not.
Fair enough. Any response from Reason or Lonerbox to that, or Soy Pill for that matter?
I think bringing up the New Deal is as if these kind of policies are inherently populist. I think is a little bit of a long shot, really. I mean, you can still bring up these
Wouldn't
types.
call the New Deal populist?
And I thought we were talking about rhetoric here, not the policies underneath rhetoric. I mean, if you're saying
Well, I
that,
mean,
if you're
I would
saying
say
that
that the New
populism's
Deal
about
is both.
rhetoric, I mean, it's not necessarily about the policy, right?
Well, I think what I would say is it's a style of politics. Populism is a style of politics. So that includes rhetoric, but it's not exclusive to rhetoric, I would
Yeah,
say.
saying a billionaire tax. This is a populist policy, right? It
doesn't
these
have to be, though,
billionaires
right?
need their wealth redistributed to you, the common man, right?
No,
like
it
the
can be
policy can be
populist.
populist.
It can be, sure, okay, but a lot of things can be, but it doesn't mean to say we're defining it by this, right? So, I mean, you can have New Deal type policies. Like if Biden could have brought in aspects of the Green New Deal that's been suggested, right? I think he would have done if he had more power, probably. We can talk about hypotheticals another day, but it doesn't make him populist for implementing some of that policy. So I think the idea that these types of policies are contingent on some populist movement, I think is a bit of a long shot. It's that then you are starting to create an ideology around it. It's either an ideology or it's not.
Well, it's a thin ideology. Populism doesn't just mean nothing, right? Populism means something, or else we wouldn't be sitting here talking about what it means, right?
It's about a kind of narrative.
It's just that it's not inherently it's not like socialism, which is an ideology committed to worker control of the means of production, right? It's not fascism, which is all in service to the state. It's not liberalism, which is about liberty, equality, fraternity, however, whatever your definition of liberalism is.
Sure, but you can't give it ownership of policy. That's my whole point, right? Because then you start to suggest that certain policies would fall within the remit of populism. But I'm saying, well, no, you could argue for this policy in a much cleaner, more honest way without the populist narrative.
I think some policies lend themselves more easily to populism than others.
Can you give us examples?
For example, like a bill to restrict voting rights to people who to people who hold property, to people who own a house. One could frame this in a populist way, but I would say that would be a lot harder to do than someone who was trying to expand voting rights to a one person, one vote situation. So I would say it would be possible for someone to try and say, the true people are the people that own the house, and they should be the ones that
they'd be like, the corrupt elites are spending money on these people who don't really care about voting and forcing them to vote against your interests, and so we're restricting those. Like, you could make that populist. It would be very difficult to spin that way.
I mean,
that's what I mean when I say certain policies lend themselves more easily to populism, but you can try and use a populist framing to sell almost anything you want.
Do you not think that populism sometimes potentially destroys the potential of those policies being implemented?
Just a housekeeping thing. I gotta take a thing real quick. No slurs. I'll be right back. But yeah.
What were you saying? Sorry.
Well, I mean, some of this populist rhetoric really destroys the ability for some of these policies to be implemented or to even be discussed because they become so polarized. The wealth tax is a great example, right? So if you look at the details of a wealth tax, I mean, you really should take capital flight into consideration and the kind of taxes that could be plausible, right? There's some money that some governments could raise, okay? But it's not going to be groundbreaking. So it doesn't really fit into the populist narrative to say the Green Party in the UK that lives and dies by a policy like this, because it could help a little bit, but it's not going to help a great deal. Now, it's been associated so strongly with the Green Party in the UK. I mean, the Labour Party can't touch it. It's not going to be that much of a mainstream discussion because it's become associated with that populist movement. And so they've actually lessened its chance of being implemented. Do you not think that happens? I mean, that's just one example. I can go through some more if you want.
I mean, I think that is a problem that isn't necessarily unique to populism. I think that's a problem of political polarization generally, which
Yeah,
is
sure, okay, but I mean, polarization can go by.
What's more polarizing than populism, right? Us versus them, people versus the establishment, the corrupt elites, the corrupt
right,
institutions.
these are
Like,
they can be tied together, but polarization I think goes back further in American politics than the
Okay, but
current
populism is a pretty strong vessel for polarizing public. You could at least admit that is a potential weakness of populist rhetoric.
Yeah, I mean, populism can be polarizing. Yeah, absolutely.
Like AOC's former
And-
supporters that now hate her because she's not as populist as they would like.
Or for example, I mean, whenever no one said it better than FDR whenever he was talking about how the business community was reacting to his policies. He said, I welcome their hatred. He polarized the business community, the rich, robber barons at the time. He polarized them against him. It was very polarizing in politics at the time.
I mean, it was
maybe
there was almost an attempted coup against FDR, the business plot they called it.
maybe I'm just, again, you can have a go at me for just stealing from like political scientist definitions or appealing to authority or whatever. But like, when I think of the populism that we see today, or the people who are defined as populists, like typically, then it does seem to ring like with this definition from Werner Muller, which is just this idea that like populists, the polarization is not an accident, because populists, like according to this guy, like is that they do claim to have like the exclusive moral representation of the people, which means like if they're the only collective like authentic voice of the people, then that does mean that everyone else is like some kind of illegitimate or some kind of like corrupt or some kind of like part of the establishment, which is also why you see these issues with like with Green Party again being asked like, would you form a coalition with Keir Starmer? It's like, absolutely not even to keep reform. We'd never touch that like cog in the Zionist machine, right? Because like and he couldn't, right? Because if he said he would, he'd lose all his supporters, right? That's the whole issue. The same reason that like despite the common interests of like people like restore, reform conservatives and all that, they're always at odds with each other.
I think if a Democrat were to say the Trump administration and the MAGA movement does not represent the interests of Americans, is not the true voice of Americans, they've taken you for a ride, they've swindled you, they're defrauding the public, they're all these things, they're representatives of the billionaire class, of the business interests, of the Epstein class, whatever. I think that would be a correct thing to say. So I don't actually have a problem if that. I mean,
what do you think? What do you think
correct.
what do you think the difference is between a Democrat? It's like a standard. It's like also for something. Say a Democrat saying that, like your standard Democrat saying that about Trump, and the Greens saying that about Labor, or Reform saying that about Labor and Conservatives. Like, what do you think the difference is to me?
I don't
or
think
like
it's true. I think in one case it's true.
Well,
and in one
not
case,
just that. No, not necessarily
well,
the
no,
truth
that's a
value
pretty
of it.
important part.
No, I know,
the
but
important part is that
that's
it's
not
true
what
in
I'm
one
asking
case,
you though.
not
That's
in the other.
yeah, I know, but that's not what I'm getting at. Like, I think there is something to be said. Like, I don't think a standard Democrat would claim to have like exclusive, like to be an exclusive moral like representative of the people. I think like a Democrat would probably say like Biden's speech, right? Remember Biden's speech about the MAGA conservatives or the MAGA Republicans? He is saying that they can share a country with regular Republicans, with moderate Republicans. He drew a specific line at the anti-democracy MAGA right wing, and I think that's
Yeah,
maybe the difference. Whereas I don't think you see that from your standard populist, where they think that there are like other moderate like groups or parts of the establishment that you could actually that can represent the people from time to time, like they would accept
and
defeat
FDR
to.
didn't target every single Republican. He targeted the economic royalists, right? I mean, I don't think that's a particularly unique thing to say, like, because I mean, it's a democracy. You want to try and bring as many people over onto your side as possible. You don't want to demonize the entire other side to the extent that MAGA has weaknesses. I think that's one of them.
Okay, so again, and I'm trying not to do this by like the appeal to authority, but so do you think that distinction is useless then? Do you think like there's not any value in saying that like it's probably when people claim to be representing the will of the people, it probably matters when you have particular groups, which I would call the populists, who claim to have an almost exclusive moral
And
representation of people.
after you answer this, I do have a question for Reason in Loner Box, but go ahead.
Sorry. So the question is whether or not to be a populist.
like Loner, is the distinguishing factor whether or not they have the moral authority as the only I can fix it sort of thing, the same way Trump is. Like that's what's distinguishing you, or how you're distinguishing maybe like an average Democrat versus like what you would call a populist, which are these people like Democrats don't get it, only I get it. Like I am going to solve this corrupt
Yeah,
system.
because what I see from populists, whether it's left or right, and maybe you can find an exception to this if you want, like in the current day, but like, yeah, that's what I see. Because even Trump goes to the point that he can't even work with like rhinos, right? Like his moderate Republicans, he has issues with them as well. So yeah, but whereas a Democrat who says Trump does not represent the people, most Democrats are not going to say we're like. A moderate Republican could never represent the American people. Most of them would probably say that they can share a country with moderate Republicans, right? Or with like
Yeah,
non-tyrannical
but even then,
Republicans.
even whenever you're limiting it to just the anti-democracy. How did you put it earlier? The anti-democracy Republicans. You're still drawing a line and saying these people cannot and do not represent the interests of the American people. Can't
So
represent.
Democrats claim to be the exclusive moral arbiter or the exclusive moral representatives of people alongside moderate Republicans. But
I
that's
think
not how
whenever you're
populists
talking about,
operate, is it? That's not how Trump operates,
well,
or
I think
Orban, or
well, I don't accept your definition of populism, which has sort of been the whole.
it's not my. To be fair,
What we,
that's not my definition. I was drawing from
Mueller.
Mueller. Yeah.
okay, well, I don't accept. I mean, I think that the definitions that we've sort of the whole argument the whole time has been that we think that y'all's definitions of populism are too narrow, and
We find it
y'all
too
think ours
vague.
are too broad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because
So this is sort of-
and it's important. It's an important discussion, right? Because I do think there's other ingredients that are being missed here, or perhaps not acknowledged. That it's not just about stating that there is, in some case, for example, like a proto-fascist leader in the US right now, right? You don't have to be populist to state that. But it's also how far you go with defining yourself by that and how much you stick to that. And this notion that
And whether it should be embraced. But finish up, because I have a question for you.
Well, the notion that populism isn't polarizing, at least acknowledging that weakness, I find insane. And also, not just from left to right.
I
And
know.
but
I
on the
said
left,
that. I said explicitly that it was.
yeah, and on the left, we're experiencing it completely destroying the left. I mean, whether it be the Green Party in the UK or Marxist Leninists in the US. I mean, they're doing a complete Brutus on the Democrats, even when they want to work with them on a Sunday. And by Monday, they're stabbing them in the back. So, I mean, and that is because of populist rhetoric. And if
Is that because of the populism, or is it because they're Marxist-Leninists?
Well, I think those two things in the US at this point in time go hand in hand. I think to be a
This is
Marxist
sort of the
is going to be
problem,
a subcategory of populism.
If we define populism as being something inherently anti-liberal, we're gonna. I mean, it sort of precludes the whole debate, which is can populism and liberalism coexist? If we define populism as something inherently anti-liberal, something that's only had whenever you're a Marxist-Leninist on one hand or a fascist on the other. I mean, of course, that's going to be anti-liberal.
Sure, but
anti-capitalists are by definition going to be populist because their entire worldview is precipitated on the idea that the corrupt capitalist establishment doesn't care about all of the workers' needs, right? So they're just inherently populist, but that's not the restriction of what populism is.
Sorry, I jumped in front of you, Whick.
No, I'm letting it go because this is an interesting back and forth.
I agree with Soy Peel here, but the fact is we haven't really found good examples of what we can all agree is populist that isn't polarizing.
Well, I'll ask them that, right? But I guess to your side, ReasonRiff and Mr. Lonerbox, Mr. Box, I don't know, Mr. Loner, Mr. Box, whichever. I mean, you would acknowledge, at least in the U.S. right now, that we are in a populist moment, correct?
What would I? Yeah,
yes,
of course, yeah.
Yes. Given that that's the case, would it not be foolish to not at least use some of that momentum in order to win elections?
If we go by what Ryan seems, what I think you're saying, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is like employing some of the rhetoric, because there are some actually like useful ways you can point to a corrupt wealthy elite pulling strings to fuck over the rest of the people and to destroy the liberal institutions and everything, then yeah, you can use that. But I just don't think that's what makes you a populist.
Okay, $10 from Pondering Politics to say if we're going to debate populism, I think it's important to know how Joe defines populism. Can Soy please answer? Okay, now that the meme's out of the way. Okay, but I guess
Well, that's
I don't
fine.
know. I
Look,
just
here we
yeah,
can
go ahead.
put a pin in that for a second. If we can call it whatever. You know, if you don't want to call it populism because you think that populism is something more specific, you know, that's fine. I can respect that opinion. But if we can at least agree with what you said there, that it would be reasonable for Democrats to employ populist rhetoric. I mean, I think that goes a long way to understanding, you know, what I'm trying to get at here.
I mean, if you want to describe populism as just basically this narrative, which then starts to include a whole host of movements that go against any authoritarian figure, but let's say it's even a subcategory of those narratives which are reflecting on a context, right? So they are reflecting on a situation. Maybe it be the depression of that Roosevelt was responding to, or Trump right now, and it's contextual, and it remains contextual, and there's an afterthought to that. I mean, I think that part of a narrative it's important to point that out. I mean, it's a bit like a historian pointing out the trends that they're seeing, and I think that's why historians are important in our society, right? I think calling that populist is going to make it an incredibly broad subject, and then we can start pointing, you know, cherry picking those specific cases which just basically be against authority at that point. So it's not really a meaningful concept anymore.
Well, the reason why I called it populism is because you see people like Derek Thompson, for instance, who specifically call themselves not populist whenever they're talking about this kind of rhetorical strategy. They think that that's a bad thing. And that's what I'm pushing back on. That's what I was pushing back on in my video, the aversion that a lot of the liberal kind of intelligentsia, the commentariat have to this kind of populist rhetoric because they think it's undignified or they think it's unacceptable.
Well, can you just steelman for us why you think that the intelligentsia, as you would call the liberals who are against this,
Well, no, not
are find populist rhetoric unacceptable? Why do you think that's true?
Just to be clear, not everyone who disagrees with me is the liberal.
No, yeah. That was a little bit of a a little bit of a cheap shot, but yeah, go. You know what I mean. Go ahead.
But yeah, like the people who write in like the Atlantic and the people who write New York Times bestselling books, I think we could call them the intelligentsia. Why they would? I think that they think that the rhetoric is corrosive to society. I mean, I think that's why they don't like it. I think they think it's corrosive to society. They think the rhetoric is corrosive to society.
I guess for me, and this is just my personal concern here, is that it does tend to have the effect of creating a situation where institutions are seen as the enemy, whether that's intended or not. It's sort of like, and excuse the hyperbole a little, right? Like, even though racist rhetoric might be popular, that does not mean we should indulge in it because it would create a corrosive effect that we would find
for sure
unacceptable.
Well,
and I think
and it also would
be
untrue. I mean, the important thing about racism is that it's I mean, among other things, is that it's a lie. I mean, it's a vicious lie, a slur against entire groups of people. And I don't want to lie.
Sure.
The important point that I'm making right now is that to describe reality right now, I think is to sound a little bit like a populist. And to be clear, there are institutions that I think are they're not working very well. Even before Trump, they weren't working.
Yeah, but there's a difference between saying Elon Musk is destroying our democracy through his politicking and his buying out of social media, moderation of the platform, and pushing algorithmic narratives that are helpful to fascists, and billionaires are doing this. Like, there's a difference between these two things. It's like saying
both are true. I think both of those would be true statements.
So you think all billionaires, every single one, is doing this?
No, I don't think every single billionaire. I think
so
billionaires.
But
no, I think well, yes, I understand the point that you're making with that, talking about that demonizing wealthy people.
Groups, yeah,
demonizing groups. But the truth is, I think that there is too much wealth concentration in society.
This is my point before.
And that's corrosive to society.
Go ahead. Yeah, but this was my point before, Ryan. I think this is really a symptom of a greater problem, and simply it's about and a part of populism is intentionality. That there's an intention of a group to do bad to people, and I think if you don't include that as an ingredient, then you're and even then, you can still have non-populist movements saying that Trump means badly, right? We've agreed that you can have these non-populist movements that will also state that. But even within populism, there always has to be an intent, right? I mean, not all billionaires mean badly right now. You would agree with this?
Yeah, but I think I think that there are a class. I think there are a distinct class of right-wing political interests and business interests, a clearly identifiable class that's affiliated with the Trump family and the Trump administration that do mean harm to American democracy.
Okay, but billionaires in general, using Whick's terminology, the billionaires are evil.
Well, no, that's not the term. That's, to be clear, that's not, if I was writing someone's speeches, that's not what I would say.
Well, then I want to ask Reason. Okay, so you're identifying what I assume you agree to be a correct problem, which is moneyed interests have undue power in elections, and this has been the case for over 25 years, if not longer. And you want to say these people are too powerful in elections. We need to do something about it. But you can't say billionaires because you would then say, well, not all billionaires. What do you say instead?
Well, I'm saying that the cause of income inequality is more to do. Is not just about the interest of the.
I'm not talking about income. I'm talking about people with
thing,
that much wealth being able to completely sway elections.
Well, they only exist because of income inequality being part of the system, right? And they can also be part of the solution. Those that exist at this point in time, because it's simply not in their interest to for this income inequality to continue to exist. I think it needs to be more of a negotiation than a hostile takeover here. Otherwise, because they have so much power, this type of rhetoric is actually hastening the right gaining more power, and we just simply never actually being able to implement anything. We've had decades of this. This isn't new. This kind of rhetoric about billionaires being the problem. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn's been going out about it for decades. I don't think he's had much of an effect. It would be better to. I would not
say that billionaires are the problem. I would say that the ability of wealth to influence politics in America is the problem. And
right, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, the point being then is,
but that's
you no longer have the perpetrator with the intention anymore. You've taken that away, so it's no longer populist rhetoric to state that. You realize that? Yeah?
No, I think that there is a clear group of right-wing political interests and business interests centered around the Trump administration that is intending to do harm to American democracy.
That's the historian's description. That's just stating things as a matter of fact based on evidence, right?
Yeah,
that's rather than a generalization.
But saying there are oligarchs or billionaires, whatever word you want to use, that have moneyed interests in changing elections and have the ability to do so, we need to fight against that, and that's corruption. This is just true. So what do you say to make it not populist? Just money out of politics? Well, okay, why is money out of politics important? Because there's a group of people with money trying to do subversion of democratic will, right?
It's the level of vagueness by which you describe it. So it sounds subtle, but it's important because it becomes part of the description. So if you just say billionaires or the wealthy or however you want to describe this group, once it becomes this very vague statistical thing that you're approximating by some absolute, right? You don't know all billionaires, and we don't know the intentions. Some of them probably are on our side, by the way, politically. Then it's just oversimplifying a problem and creating a boogeyman, rather than pointing at individuals that we know have influenced politics and saying that is bad, and we know their intention is bad. That's more of a historical description of the situation. That's something else.
I reject the idea that populists can only speak in vagaries. I mean, I think that's just not true. I think the idea to identify, identifying a clear enemy can absolutely be part of populism. I mean, when Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense, it wasn't directed even at Parliament. It was directed at the king, even though that may not have even been, really true necessarily. Parliament was the one, levying all these taxes, but he directed it at a single person. To the idea that populism can only speak in vagaries, I just don't think that's true at all. You can absolutely point out singular individual people who are doing damage to society. And I think that there's a clear class of people centered around the Trump administration, centered around the Republican Party and its leaders, that are doing damage to American democracy. They've tried to steal an election once before. They probably will try and steal the next election if they
exactly.
Feel like
but you don't even have to predicate with that. I think you know this based upon evidence. There's a distinct difference between a generalization and stating something of historical fact or likelihood. And I disagree. Yeah. This is where we certainly disagree. I think populism does start to approximate it into vague terms. I think if you study
Why?
because that's the president of what that now we're getting into just an epistemological issue of how of how we're defining the words here. I mean, every populist movement forward goes into some vague description.
Would you say that when the American revolutionaries directed the Declaration of Independence at the king, whenever Thomas Paine directed common sense at the monarchy, that made it not populist because it was directed at one person or at least a group of people? Did that make that
in terms of the
populist?
modern populist? I'm talking about in the modern context as well. So it's a bit difficult to look back at the historical ones, especially. Forgive me, my knowledge of American history doesn't give me the context.
We'll let Ryan go. Ryan, go ahead.
I think whenever we're talking about if liberalism is or is not incompatible with populism, it's inherently a historical question. We have to look back at liberalism and times it's interacted with populism and say, did this conflict or not? I mean, so I think the idea that we can't look back at history to see if liberalism and populism are, incompatible, I just reject that outright. I mean, I respect you wanting to stay focused on the modern day. I think that's important, and I think it's relevant that we stay, grounded in what's happening now. But to say that we can't look at history at all, I mean, I think I just reject that.
But I mean, in preparation for this, I think today is really all that matters in terms of the meanings of words.
Hold on, but reason, you would we have to put the modern context in the historical context in order for the modern context to make sense, do we not?
Sure. I mean, right, the origin of the term populism is for the 19th century.
What Ryan here is arguing is that because populism has been hand in hand with some of these what movements that we would now consider to be liberal or at least liberal adjacent movements, that this shows how they aren't necessarily incompatible. I don't know if I
but it's actually
agree
historically,
with that.
because I don't have the historical context, I don't want to argue that either way. One thing that I do think moves away from populist movements is when they do start to talk in vague terms with simple solutions. We kind of agreed at the beginning, then we've gone into the fact that it may be more nuanced than that.
Well, I'd agree. That's not the kind of populism I'd want liberals to adopt. I think there's a clear
Well, hold on, just real quick. But Ryan, their argument, as I understand it, is that whether you want it to or not, engaging in this type of rhetoric will lead to that.
Well, I mean, that's why I'm trying to cite the historical examples of that not being the case, right?
I don't. Well, I
understand.
When you look at these historical examples, they certainly engaged in very illiberal activities. That even though I like the Revolutionary War, the Sons of Liberty did some horrific shit, right?
The Sons of Liberty. Do you condemn the Boston Tea Party right now, Whick? As we're approaching,
hold on, they killed kids, bro. Like
they also tarred and feathered people. Would you say
it's pretty bad.
You condemn the Sons of Liberty?
To the extent where their actions did not target the right targets, yes.
Do you condemn the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, Whick?
To the extent where they targeted people who did not deserve to be targeted, yes.
Wait, would you say, and let me quote our favorite tanky together, not every revolution is perfect, right?
No, but we can condemn the imperfections, absolutely. And I think that without populism, these imperfections would be less. Like it would be these
populism didn't make the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising bad, dude.
Well, no, I'm not talking about the Warsaw.
Populism,
that was a different.
The American Revolution.
I don't think that was populism, bro. Like that wasn't.
But I do think we're lacking.
Wait. Can I just say something?
Go ahead, Ryan.
In respect to the fact that we're approaching the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, without populism, the American Revolution would not have happened. The common sense. I mean, you can even talk about his staunch opponents. John Adams was one of Thomas Paine's staunch opponents, and I believe it was he that said, without the pen of Paine, the sword of Washington would have been raised in vain. I mean, Common Sense was an incredibly populist pamphlet. Without it, there would have been no American Revolution. So I reject the idea that the revolution would have been more effective. Without populism.
It's funny that you said that because I just found a really interesting bit from this Muller book. I'm just skimming through it right now. When he mentions John Adams, because again he's making this because again, wait, just to be clear, Ryan, would you? I think you maybe said earlier that it does sound like you are contesting just like the way conventional wisdom views populism right now. Am I wrong about that?
No, I think that my interpretation of how conventional wisdom views populism is more correct. I mean, I don't want to fight you on that too much since we spent too much time on
Um,
that. But I would say that the idea that populism is about representing the common people against an establishment or elite, I think that's pretty close to conventional wisdom.
I think Wick made
no,
a,
but well, conventional wisdom tends to go further than that, though. Conventional wisdom tends to group
I
populist left and
disagree.
right.
But that's
Okay.
okay. I disagree that,
So wait,
that
so does
I don't wanna,
conventional wisdom call the anti-regime protesters in Iran populist or not? It never does. Never.
I don't know.
No
To
one
be
calls
honest,
them populist. No one calls them the populist protesters. They talk about Trump the populist, or Morales the populist, or Farage the populist. They don't talk
they
about the
also
Iranian
talk about
protesters
Bernie
who are
Sanders
the
the
people against the. Yeah, they talk about Bernie as well because
but you
again because of
rejected that at the
rhetoric.
beginning. You
I
seemed like
didn't
it was
reject that. I
uncomfortable.
said that
You,
there
you
are
seemed
elements
fairly
there.
uncomfortable with that
I
idea.
Hold on,
didn't
one at a time, one
say
at a time.
that.
We gotta let
Okay.
Loner finish. Loner will finish, and then Ryan can go.
I
Go.
didn't say that Bernie and Mandani were just like I reject them being populist. I said that they clearly have populist rhetoric and they have populist narratives which they espouse, and it's fine to call them populists. I just also said that
Look, that's
it
all
seems to
I'm
be that a
saying.
lot of there's it seems to be that they are much more willing to sort of move out of the populist sphere and
Look,
actually upset their populist supporters a lot of times to make peace with the institutions, which is generally a key enemy of populists left or right. That's actually what I said. But coming back to this
okay,
thing that I was, so it does sound like conventional. You're not really, you are a bit at odds with conventional wisdom
no,
because again, no
I
one's
disagree with that.
so
But
so
but
really
Well,
so
anyway,
if
wait,
I so like the average
Loner,
like
this was
political
just a
scientist or like
cursory Google
historian is
search,
going to
but the
I
the,
think that
the
the
NATO
average person.
Supreme Allied
No, no,
Hold
Commander
on,
says it's almost populism
let
on the
Ryan,
move in
let
I think
answer
the
Iran.
after
average
So
that, and then
person.
you can.
someone's calling
wait.
it
What
that.
did you?
I think the average person would have no trouble
Fuck
calling
me, man.
Bernie Sanders a populist, Mamdani a populist, FDR a populist. I don't think that the average person would have trouble calling any of these people
Well,
populist.
we don't
So
disagree on that though, but like we're
okay,
talking about who they have
we don't
problems with.
disagree.
We're talking about whether we're talking about like why where the explanation is for why like democracy protesters in the Arab Spring or people in or the ones in Iran why they're generally not put into the populist umbrella, even
You
though
don't
they
think
are
the Arab Spring would have been
definitionally.
populist? I've heard the Arab Spring called populist for sure.
Depending on which parts of the movement we're talking about, but like when it came to people like in say like in Egypt, when it was like Tahrir Square, like yeah, we are against like an authoritarian government, and our ambition is for democracy. No, that part wasn't really seen as populist. It got called populist from my fairly loose
Yeah.
memory. It got called populist when it was starting to go into like again general like like when a lot of the rhetoric was being sort of like brought into like a more conspiratorial wing from the likes of like Al Jazeera and all that. Like
Right.
that's more like where the
So we
populist
would
element
agree
came in.
that
But the fact
populism.
that they were pro-democracy protesters did not suffice to call them populist. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree, but we agree that populism can be used in a way that we're more okay with, in a way that we're less okay with. I think that's fair,
I
right?
mean, we've also agreed that being anti-authoritarian is not a priori populist. So, I mean, there is a question of where we're putting that line that a movement becomes populist, right? Because there is, and this is a point that Wick was making briefly before, that even when it starts with, let's say, this good populism that you're describing, which is a form of anti-authoritarianism, can also blur into this kind of more vague notion that crystallizes around this narrative and holds on
And
to it for
and
daylight.
I want to be clear with my criticism. It almost always does. I can't think of a
What?
situation where it hasn't.
Sorry, say
Yeah, can you
what
give me
does
can you give me a historical example where this populist rhetoric hasn't blended in with some pretty bad shit?
hasn't blend. What do I'm confused.
So, like
Could
I
you?
said, you cited the revolution, right,
Yeah,
as going with some populist rhetoric, and yes,
for sure.
absolutely, populism fueled a lot of the initial revolutionary fervor. A lot of people think that like George Washington and the founding fathers came in and it was like a top down thing. No, it wasn't. Right, even before the founding fathers were writing their papers, the people did not like being subject to the king, and they were having skirmishes and fights with the British, right? Like even before the before any of that was happening. So yes, there was some populist kind of fervor in there.
For
But like
sure.
n- a lot of there were excesses in the Revolutionary War engaged
Yeah.
in by
Oh,
revolutionaries
absolutely.
that we would find abhorrent because of the us versus them narrative. They were
No.
British, and therefore it was okay to take away their
Okay.
land, right? If you looked at what they did to the Tory, I believe it was the Tories. I forget what they called them, right? They basically said, "Oh, well, we're just going to take it." There was
I
a
think
big
it was
argument.
okay to take away some Tories' land, but I think whenever we're talking about, would you say that on balance, the American Revolution was a good thing or a bad thing?
Yes, obviously it was a good thing. Yes,
Yeah, I mean that's all I'm saying. Of
but would
course,
it have been
in
better
any
without the
war,
populist fuel?
no, it wouldn't have happened without the populist fuel.
I don't know if we can say that though. I think it
Okay, well,
might.
let me
It
take. I
probably
think
would
we can
have.
absolutely say that. I think we
But you
can.
both have different understandings of what the populist fuel is,
I
because I
think
don't think
you
Wick
know.
sees the
Here's
populist
here's
fuel as
Frederick
we're trying to
Douglass.
overthrow a tyranny.
Here's Frederick Douglass. Those who profess to favor freedom yet depreciate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the
Yeah,
awful roar of
agitation
many
isn't
waters.
populist. At least, like you can have liberal
Agitation.
agitators.
I think. Well, see, now we're presupposing that liberalism and populism are at odds. I don't think
Well,
that
no,
that's
no, I don't.
necessarily
Like
the
I
case.
said, I don't think that's a presupposed thing. I think that there often, and I have just agreed with you that there are often times where liberalism and populism have gone hand in hand,
Yeah, that's all I'm
obviously.
saying.
But I'm saying that that's usually not been good for liberalism.
I think the American Revolution was great for liberalism. Yeah, I think
Okay,
it was
we
fantastic for
just
liberalism.
fundamentally disagree, I guess.
It's
You
funny that
think
you
the
mentioned
American Revolution was bad for liberalism?
No, but the populist part was. It held us back. So, for
How do you think
example,
the American
without the
Revolution would have
populist part, we probably wouldn't have the how many years, decades of slavery after?
You don't think that? Well, I, I think
Like, hold
maybe
on,
we have
you
some.
understand
I
that the
think we have some
revolution in and
rosy.
of itself was more liberal, but it wasn't like
Yeah,
entirely liberal. It
I
had a
think maybe I think
whole
you have.
host of issues that were very illiberal in that.
I think maybe you have a slightly rosy view on the average person's view of race relations in the American colonies in the 1700s.
I mean, just to bring it back to the modern day, because it's kind of the important point here.
Well,
And
we're
about with
talking about history, brother, and I know you
But
don't
yeah,
know.
well,
about
No, wait,
history.
wait, before you
yeah, but
before you
so,
do that, I was
I mean, do you
wanting to.
disagree? Do you disagree with John Adams that if Thomas Paine hadn't written Common Sense, the American Revolution wouldn't have happened?
It's
I mean, that was
interesting
a
what
man
you
that
say
was.
about, because I came across this mention of John Adams in Muller's book. It's quite funny what he says here. So from Muller's book in the top, he says, that also means that people is a volatile, risky, maybe outright dangerous expression. Some of the French and American revolutionaries certainly thought so. John
Yeah, he was
Adams made
very
little. Yeah,
anti-democracy.
John Adams made little effort to hide his anxieties about the possible consequences of an uncontrolled usage of, quote, the people. He says, it is dangerous to open so fruitful a source of controversy and altercation. There would be no end of it. New claims will arise. Women will demand a vote. Lads from 12 to 21 will think their rights not enough attended to. And every man who has not a farthing will demand an equal voice with any other in all acts of state. It tends to confound and destroy all distinctions and prostrate all ranks to one common level. That's where he
Yes,
ends the
just
That
quote.
sounds
and just
awesome
to
to me.
piggyback
All of
on
that
that,
sounds fantastic, by the
and
way.
to
All of that
piggyback
sounds
on that,
great.
hold on, just to piggyback and to answer your question, Ryan, right? Like, would it have happened without the populist fuel behind it? Without the common sense being written? I think
Yeah.
eventually it probably would have. I think it was veering towards inevitable. But one of the reasons that the revolution was ultimately good for liberalism is because the constitution that they established was fundamentally anti-populist.
The Constitution, what
Well, do you disagree with that? That
uh,
the Constitution was a fundamentally
the const
anti-populist document?
the Constitution was not as democratic as it could have been, but it was more populist than the idea of not having any representation at all.
I think it was more liberal, not more populist, right? Because populist and democracy, I don't believe populism and democracy go hand in hand. I think you'd be populist and anti-democratic.
Well, yeah,
Um,
because when we talk about historical figures, if you're reading about populism, one of
yeah,
the two of the biggest examples they will give you are Hitler and Mao, because more than just claiming to speak for the people against the establishment, they also meet quite a lot of other things that most people seem to, who identify themselves as populists or who get identified as populists, tend to hold. They both had this very fantastical view of like the common man. For Mao, it was the peasant. For Hitler, it was like the German folk. It was the idea of like constantly appointing people who had no qualifications or like relevant skills in particular positions they were in. It was constantly appealing to conspiratorial explanations for your failures, or like the powers that be still having control even if you've taken them out of this or that institution. It was always this like blame the institution. So like, but again, but these are the figures again that seem to be fall more cleanly under like the, at least from what I've read, like the meeting more than just like one or two of these populist traits.
And
Well,
it becomes
wild.
this fake narrative. And the point I wanted to bring about bringing
You
back
do
to
got you got to let him respond though. That was
Okay.
an
I feel like-
accusation. You got to let him respond. Yeah.
I feel like we're kind of going in. I'm trying to sort of move. I don't think we're going to agree on the definition of populism. So I just want to say I think that's probably not going to be a result of this debate. I don't think we're going to agree on the definition of populism.
Well, yeah,
I
but-
disagree. I disagree with the definition of populism that you've given. I think you disagree with the definition of populism that Soy and I have provided, and that's okay. I think we can try and talk about the second order effects
Yes.
of populism,
Yes.
and maybe move beyond that.
And
I'll
well,
say,
let me just ask directly
Yeah.
in that vein, and this is to Soy Pill and to this is to all of you, but I'd like Soy Pill and Ryan to answer first. Do you think that we will be more liberal as a country, better off as a party, if the Democrats embraced populism, as you
Yeah.
understand it?
Absolutely. I
And
mean,
why?
like, this is
Can you
kind
give
of what I
us
was getting at the
lay out the
beginning.
argument for us, and then we can.
There are enough things where the institutions are failing people, whether or not that's because they're corrupt or because they are inefficient or because there's a bloated bureaucracy. Like, you can point to this as like these are the people that are making it bad, or you can do a more Derek Thompson thing and say, hey, their incentive structures are not laid out well, and this is too bloated, and we can fix this. Regardless, there is a huge populist movement right now that people are capitalizing on because the current status quo of politicians are not answering this question to voters well enough for them to feel invigorated, to feel like someone's fighting for them. And so you can either say, hey, let's capitalize on that frustration and say these are the things that are causing this, whether that be moneyed elites and moneyed interest, which I think are sometimes true, or if it's just, hey, this is the issue and there's no simple solution, but we're going to work towards fixing it and making your life better. You need to embrace that to some extent. It sounds like our opponents in this debate in general are okay with that, as long as it's not like the slopulism, brain rotty, this is the only solution way, or this is like more like conspiratorial. Obviously, I think we would all disagree with that. But so long as we're able to, I don't know, I want to say co-opt like the worst movements or what the worst movements could become and turn them into something a little more constructive. I think this is what we're going to need to do in order to win an election. And I think the elections that we failed, like 2016, were because we failed to do that.
I mean,
I agree with Soy.
there was a few points here. It goes also back to last week's debate, and it seems clear that a lot of Americans aren't that happy about legislating the media and these platforms, which frankly promote polarization. It's speeding that up. So the system and the electorate is just simply more sensitive to polarization, which we can agree to varying degrees that even this anti-authoritarian kind of discussion, if you don't want to call it populist, or you do, it doesn't really matter, does it? Can lead to that kind of generalization narrative that then becomes stubbornly embedded and that everything is based around it. And we know, with all the best intent, you may not be in control of that. You have to be super, super careful about how you use that type of rhetoric. And I do believe there can be a less divisive, less polarizing way to talk about the same policies and to recognize the bigger picture. And I think it has a better, healthier, long-term prospect in politics. I think a lot of this populist stuff is this sugar rush politics, which gets a big explosion at the beginning. Jeremy Corbyn, big support, Jeremy Corbyn, all that stuff. A few years later, he's doing abysmally and loses election and gets kicked out within a couple of years.
What do you guys have, like 4 prime ministers in the last 5 years?
What's
What?
that?
Oh,
In 7 years, right?
And I think populism.
Can I ask a practical question?
go ahead.
Do you think John Ossoff is unacceptably populist?
From that example you gave, no.
What about you, Reason?
Can you give the example again? Sorry.
Well, I mean, him talking about the Epstein class and talking about how this is a government of, by, and for the richest people in society, and all this, that, and the other.
I mean, this is what
the general milieu.
This is, I mean, in terms of reading in preparation for this, this paper, The Populist Zeitgeist, talking about using some populist rhetoric, but not necessarily being populist, right? And this is also another vagueness to it. So I think sometimes there is a lending to this language, and I think it's a real risk. But I don't think it makes them necessarily populist just because they're talking about some of these things, especially if they're based on evidence. Like there exists people going to Epstein's Island and all this kind of stuff, right?
I think if we're defining populism as lying, then I think obviously I'm going to disagree.
Not lying, but being too overly vague to the point in which you can then just start applying it to too many places. A bit like the concept of populism in this conversation.
Like using it as a default explanation, the same way like you could call it like an orthodox Marxist as someone who's like everything is because of the contradictions of capital. The same way
For
that
sure.
I think like the more stringently populist you are, the more you are likely to blame
But
things like
this
dark
is
money
why
or the
this is why I
like.
tried to give historical examples of populists not being overly vague, in my opinion. But you know that was the intention behind there. But if we can agree that John Ossoff is not unacceptably populist,
Is
that
he
is
a
the main.
populist? Would you say he is a populist?
I think yeah, I think he's a prime
Okay,
example of like
that's
liberal
okay.
populism. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, that's the thesis of the video, right? I mean, that's the thesis of the video.
Do you think that's
So
conventional wisdom?
I think that his rhetoric in those moments absolutely would
No, no, no.
be
Is it
Just
conventional
just
wisdom
just to
that
be
John
clear.
Ossoff is a
no, no, it's
populist?
not. It's
Okay.
not
No,
conventional
but hold
wisdom,
on,
which is
just
why I thought it was. Wait, can I say one thing?
yeah, one thing, and
It's
then I
not
got it.
conventional wisdom, which is why I thought it was necessary to make the video because I
Yeah,
don't
so
think people understand why. I wanted to make the point that this is one of the reasons why I think he's successful, and I think it's not conventional wisdom, and I think that's bad. I think a lot of liberals are missing an important aspect of why John Ossoff is successful, and it's because he does a little populism.
yeah, Loaderbox, would you disagree with the characterization of Ossoff talking about the Epstein class being a problem, right? That, at least to me, is a populist kind of rhetorical flourish,
Yeah,
is
he's
it
using
not?
populist rhetoric, but like again, I don't know why this is so confusing. Like, how many left-wing parties in the UK or in Europe have imposed left-wing policy using communist rhetoric and Marxist rhetoric, but not being Marxists, right? Like Clement Attlee was one of the most successful like social democrats in
Because
like world
populism is
history. Really,
not.
he used socialist rhetoric, but he was not a like he wasn't a what we'd call
Well,
like a
their
communist
point is
or
that
Populism is
policy is
more
not
thin than that.
populist, but I mean, you could disagree with that, but that's their point, right?
Populism is much more of a thin ideology than communism or socialism. That's the
But
point.
what,
Yeah.
okay, so the reason we're going back to more. I feel like it's. I'm really sorry for bringing
Well,
definitions again, but I just think it's inescapable. I think the reason we start talking about populism so much in the last 10 years is because our traditional spectrum of left and right wasn't really making sense, right? It seemed like you saw a lot of weird convergences starting to appear, like between the left and the right over issues that you wouldn't expect them to. Like, look at what Tucker Carlson and Anna Kasparian and Cenk, like the way that they talk about Israel is like very similar now, right? Or like the way that people talk about elites and billionaires, and there's often these attempts for the left and the right to bring each other to like the populist left and right to say like what it's like it's us versus the billionaire class, or like the way that they both these groups like use the Epstein class like quite aggressively. So if we're trying to define that phenomenon, that situation where you do have these kind of like weird convergences and these weird idiosyncrasies of different political movements that don't cleanly fit into left and right, and Trump's a good example of that, then I think populism is a good word for that, because there are these things they have in common. They do have the disdain for institutions. They do have the conspiratorial explanations for failures. They do have that claiming exclusive authority over what the people's needs and desires actually are, and to the point that opposition are seen as almost like treacherous, or they're like any opposition is the establishment, rhinos or APAC. Like that's why I think populism is a useful word, but it just seems like that all these other elements are just not as important to you, I guess.
Otherwise, it's just anti-authoritarian is
I
populism
think
at
you're
that point.
writing liberalism out of having the potential for populism, and I think that is just not true. I think it's not a
Yeah,
correct.
like
Because
in
all these,
in doing that,
again, in everything I just said is not contradictory with the idea that yeah, you should probably have like there's nothing wrong with having a mass popular uprising against against a tyrannical government
Okay.
if you are a mass popular uprising and there is a tyrannical government,
Well,
right? Like
look,
obviously, I'm not going
I
to have an
don't
issue with
think we're
that,
gonna. I
but
don't think we're gonna disagree. I don't think we're gonna agree on the definition, and that's okay. If we can at least agree on the second order problem of is someone like John Ossoff unacceptably populist? I say no. I think he is acceptably populist. In fact, I think he's doing a great job. Is that conventional wisdom that John Ossoff is a populist? No, I accept that. That's why I thought it was necessary to make the video, because I
Is
think it's
Plattner
important. Is Plattner
is
populist?
Plattner unacceptably populist?
No, no, he's unacceptable
Hmm.
as a perhaps a
Sure, sure.
friend or a.
Other,
Okay,
yeah.
but no, he's
Well,
not
my
unacceptably
problem
popular.
with Plattner, and the reason I bring him up with the populist rhetoric, is a lot of people would label him as populist. And I feel so
Yeah,
correctly. It's because he's always taking shots. I think even after winning the nomination, he's been taking shots at the Democratic establishment.
for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
I find that unacceptable in this
Okay.
climate, I guess.
And I
That's
mean,
okay.
this is the point.
We can find it unacceptable.
So when
Well,
when I
wait,
ask,
wait.
do you think he's unacceptably populist? Then yeah, I think that rhetoric is unacceptably
Do I think
populist
it's
for me.
nice for him to be criticizing the Democrats in a time whenever Democrats need to win? No. But do I think he's a populist? Yeah. I think he's a
Is
populist.
there a clear definition? Sorry, it might be my ignorance, but a clear definition of the democratic establishment. Where does it start and end? Like, who is part of that and who isn't part of it?
It's whoever's. That's a good question. I
That
don't
is a
know.
good question.
Right. So
No,
this is
I-
this
I-
is
I
what
don't-
this is
I-
the point at which is populism to me is where that is starting to tread on that ground,
Well,
and that is dangerous, and that is
I think
generalizing.
I hate to. I think that the idea that populism is, by definition, vagary. I just reject that, and that was the point of bringing up the historical.
But you do see the
example. I don't
irony.
think-
It's so ironic because then the definition of populism by your standards is incredibly vague. Because it's basically anti-authoritarian. It's like realizing
it's
there's individuals or there's a group of people with there's evidence for them causing problems in society, being a big part of the problem. Like any of that kind of description becomes populism at that point.
No, we in fact, you asked a really good question of me earlier whenever you asked, is all anti-authoritarianism by definition populist? And I remember saying no to that. A lot of the Democratic Party is anti-authoritarian and not populist. But you can be anti-authoritarian and populist. Yeah.
Okay, give me an example.
Can I
of what
jump in?
someone said,
Because I've had
No,
a
go ahead.
question
Now I want to hear
because
from Soypill.
Loner.
Soypill has been
Well,
uncharacteristically silent. I guess it's because there's no women
because
like
there's
Holly around. But
there's
go
no
ahead.
annoying women in this film. No, everyone's being really respectful.
can
No,
always
'cause
shave my
Loner,
beard.
you correctly pointed out that like your kind of usage of the word populism is encapsulating of these brain rotted, conspiracy brained, like crossover horseshoe theory people like Anna and Tucker and Cenk, and I think that is a good way to categorize those people. But what my fear is that if you talk about these things and the way that they talk about them at all, and that is just going to put you in the camp that the same people who would write these people off rightfully because they're fucking insane are also going to write off people who say similar things which are true, which are there are moneyed interests that are buying elections, there are ways that you can use this populism and correctly identify these problems, and if you cede all the ground to Tucker Carlson, then that's why idiots like Anna are going to be like, well, maybe I'd vote for him, he might be my ideal candidate because he's the only one really speaking truth to power, where there are people like John Ossoff, like Plattner, like Bernie Sanders who are correctly going to identify that, hey, there are PACs that are swaying elections that they have no business swaying. There are, like, Elon Musk has no business going in and buying an election for $250 million. And if everyone's kind of just like saying, oh, well, that's populist rhetoric, we can't talk about that because you are pointing it. If populism is saying everything has to encompass that, everything is a conspiracy, then yeah, okay, I don't like populism, I guess. But like, I think populism is pointing these things out, and we need to, co-opt that from the more insane Tucker Carlsons of the world.
Do you think people who are adamant against someone like me, because I'm very anti-populist, do you think I'm at risk of like writing off Ossoff because of what he said about the Trump Epstein class, or
It sounds like no,
Who
but
are
I
these
think there
people?
are people
You might
that
not
will
be,
do
but
that.
this is a real problem. Like, for example, Noah Smith is one commentator that I saw say that the Ossoff speech that I talked about with the Epstein class rhetoric and the
Wick
millionaires
orbiter
and the
Noah
billionaires.
Smith? Okay, he's been on my show a few times. But go ahead.
Sorry?
Oh,
What?
I just name dropping. Wick orbiter Noah Smith, the guy, economics
Oh,
guy
has he
with the
been on?
Substack.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
he's been on
saw
a couple
I saw
times.
him drop a snarky
You wanna
tweet.
debate him? I could set it up.
whoa?
I don't know much about
Okay,
him
fair
other
enough.
than the fact that he's a political commentator. But I mean, yeah, I saw him drop a snarky little tweet about how the Ossoff speech was like way over the top, and yeah, I mean, we talked about Derek Thompson. That's one I talked about in the video. He explicitly defines himself as anti-populist, and he rejects and in fact calls it like childish to talk about politics in the way that someone like Ossoff does. Whenever I talk, I'm not. I think there was some confusion whenever I dropped that video that I was like subtweeting like particular creators or something or whatever. And I want to be very clear. That was a continuation of a longer sort of arc that I've been having on my channel, critiquing specifically like the liberal commentary class that publishes in like, the New York Times, the Atlantic, like the sort of that class of people. I don't think that this is as much a problem among the internet commentary people. In fact, I think because a lot of us are more in tune with the preferences and and feelings of our audiences. So we can see that someone like Ossoff is not necessarily a threat. But I have seen liberal commentary people say that that kind of rhetoric is unacceptably populist. So yeah, I don't know.
Well, to put that worry at ease, I don't know, like, it feels like, so maybe I don't know how you feel about this, ReasonRiffs, but it felt like social democratic parties in Europe managed to survive pretty well, being most of them quite anti-communist. Like, people forget this about Clement Attlee. You know, like, he literally brought the UK closer than anyone else did to McCarthyism with the way he dealt with Communist Party members. But he did that all the while using communist rhetoric and Marxist rhetoric and calling himself a socialist, right? So I think people are able to point out these nuances as long as they can figure out kind of like where the lines are. And to me, I think it's like the people with why I would never worry about someone like Ossoff compared to the likes of Anna or Kyle Kalinske or whoever is like, I think that's why I see an important element in there, which is that disdain for institutions in general and that mistrust of anything that they consider to be establishment or elite, and like blaming dark money or like opaque forces for like why things are going wrong, and also just that underlying feeling that they believe that they are the moral like arbiter of the people.
I'll tell you what makes me feel better about Ossoff, because if he had just had that populist rhetoric, and this is why I feel, well, let me not get sidetracked. If he just had that populist rhetoric that I was talking about with the Epstein class and the millionaires and the billionaires, all that type of stuff, it might make me feel uncomfortable because it might feel like a cynical play for power. But in that same speech, he gives a really impassioned defense of liberal ideals. He criticizes a speech that Eric Schmidt gave at one of the NatCon conferences. Eric Schmidt, senator from Missouri, I think, and it was basically like a blood and soil white nationalist speech. And he criticizes that, and he does so in a way that really reinforces the fact that he believes at a deep fundamental level in liberal values. I mean, in that speech, I think we have a great example of someone using populist rhetoric in defense of liberal values. And even if we don't agree on populism, you know, that's fine. Even if we don't agree on populism, if we agree that you know, is not an unacceptable thing to do, if we think that that's okay, I think that we agree on more than we disagree.
I agree on that, your last point, but I also think, you know, this is kind of like especially how things become viral and you know, it's this, we call it Chinese whispers in the UK for what they call it, a telephone, or so this game where you pass on a message and it gets distorted in the future, right? There's a real big problem we have
Every
now.
fun children's game does have a racist origin. I'm now learning.
Sorry for the terminology. But this is a real issue, so we have to be so careful with how we talk about these topics. And at the same time, there are some serious issues.
I apologize for that, by the way. Anyway.
There's some serious issues which we shouldn't shy away from talking about because it might be misconstrued as populist. And that's, I think, something that you two would probably both agree with. Well, in fact, it's one of the points that you're making here, is that there are some really big issues. There are some very corrupting individuals, for example. I mean, Donald Trump's an obvious one, right? And we shouldn't just say, "Oh, well, that he's not a problem," because that might sound populist. I do understand that that's a key point here, but that doesn't mean to say that the rhetoric is or the narrative in general and the pattern of behavior is populist.
Well, I mean, I think that's obviously, you know, we've been going around and around on this for 2 hours. I think that's just where we fundamentally disagree. You know,
I do want to.
You don't think that qualifies as populism? I do.
Being anti-authoritarian is not a priori. I mean, we agreed in that beginning. So.
Well, no, but you were talking about the. Sorry if I misunderstood what you were just saying there, but I thought you were talking about, you know, just the rhetoric. You know, the style of politics was not enough to make you a populist. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. It's about a pattern of behavior.
Yeah. No, I think the style of politics is enough to make you a populist. I think that's the definition that I hold. And it's fine that you disagree with the definition, but I think that's so much less important than the fact of the matter, which is that there are really good politicians right now, like John Ossoff, who like I think James Tallarico in Texas, who use these kind of populist styles of politics to advance liberal causes. I think that is a good thing. That's a great thing even, and we should support that.
And you don't think in the past 5 years?
Just real quick. Here's what we're gonna do, because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We're going to read these super chats. I'm going to give you guys closing statements. And then if you want to stay for call-ins, you're welcome to, and I would be happy to have you. But if you need to go, that's okay too. So that's what we're going to do right now. We are circling the drain a little bit. So let's make a little money. Okay, gang? It's Vishy for $10. Populism is used in a primary to get elected, to then become a pragmatic establishment in Congress. If you're a populist, you're just spewing out ya bum to get attention. Pragmatism is greater. Thoughts, comments?
I feel like we've already rejected the idea that like you can't be a pragmatic populist. Like just by calling pragmatism something else, it's like you're by definition saying populism necessarily is impractical. And it's like, okay, well, if that's your definition, then yeah, I agree. You should be more practical than
Our
not.
friend Reason here correctly identified FDR as behaving pragmatically in many instances, and I think everyone would call him a populist.
$2 from my listening library. LL, no, but you could roll with it if you want. I forget what this was in response to. You asked a question of the guy, but I forget your question, so sorry.
Oh, I also remember. Yeah.
Yep, $10 from BM to say, is it sloppulist or inaccurate to say that corporate America is the primary enemy to any expansion of social democracy in this country? Historically, that's been the case.
It's a little sloppulist. The only enemy. Wait, what was the wording?
Is it sloppulist or inaccurate to say that corporate America is the primary enemy to any expansion of social democracy in this country?
I'd have to think about if I'd call them the primary enemy.
Yeah, because you look at this is something that frustrates me about populism, right? I correctly identify there are certain institutions, there are certain healthcare companies, there are certain lobbied interests that are making everyone's life worse. Or let's just say, like, let's take a really easy, obvious populism example. TurboTax and other tax institutions have lobbied the government to get rid of free software that makes it easier to do taxes. This is literally muddied interest saying, fuck you, common person. I'm going to make your life harder and more expensive so that I can make more money. This is just objectively true. And you can say this isn't populism. This is populism. But then if you take this and extend it to like the Kyle Kalinske level of slopulism, where it's like, if this person took corporate money, that's bad. That's insane. That's stupid. That's slopulism. Because there are so many examples where you can look at a corporate interest that is just good. It's like, hey, like this person's going to, do good things in pharma, and I work in pharma, and I want to support that candidate because they're doing what I already want them to do. That's good. And you're just writing off that candidate and all of their policies because they received money, not because they received money from a bad organization, not because they changed their opinion, not because they have a bad platform. It's just brain rot. Oh, you received corporate money, and that is bad.
No one will hate you more, right? Like they begin to hate you when you start getting paid. That's what I can attest to, at least.
I only hate you because I pay you.
I'd like some more people to hate me.
You don't fucking buy YouTube Premium, Whick.
I'm just saying, the more money I've made, the more hate I have gotten, and it's almost a 1-to-1 correlation. But anyway,
more money, more problems.
True.
I mean, this was another good example of the difference in definitions, because simply pointing out that a certain specific lobby group is doing certain specific damage, it's literally just describing recent history, and in that sense, I don't consider that in itself populism. I consider that's a really important part of politics. But it does risk people starting to generalize that, oversimplify that, and so it can become a gateway to populism. And I'm sure you'd acknowledge that.
Like a gateway drug, like marijuana?
Well, I don't know if I'd call that, again, because we're going to disagree on definitions, a gateway to populism, but I would absolutely agree, yes, this could lead people into oversimplified, populist thinking, yes.
Exactly. So it's your responsibility when discussing that to also emphasize that point and the detail, like you just did beautifully.
Hashtag not all corporate donos.
Like that statement is just, that statement that you read out, Wick, was just not enough information, is how I would put it. It's like someone's just come up to me and said, like, hey, is X a game? It has winners and losers. I'm like, oh, maybe, I suppose it's a game. Actually, I was talking about fucking the Russia-Ukraine war. Like, it's just, you need more information.
Okay.
I agree with Loaderbox.
Yep. Natural phenomenon for $10. Populism is anti-elitism, appealing to the large swaths that feel unheard. It can be leveraged on illiberal and liberal issues. It can be based on truth and or misinfo. A quote-unquote return to the people. Thank you for that $10. $5 from Matthew to say Ryan looks like a guy who would fly a monoplane in World War I. I'm not historically literal.
I get so many of these. I get so many of these like comparison. I got someone, a funny one that I got. I looked like someone who would die on die on a barricade or something. I got a funny one like that. Like not.
Well,
Yeah, you look like you should
are
wear
they
like a pie
insulting you,
cap.
or are they like? Are
No,
they
they're saying that
Saying
praising?
like he's got
I
a
think there's
historical face.
I
Like
have a
he looks
historical
like it should be
yeah.
in black and white or sepia tone, you know, or like a
Yeah,
painting.
I get those. Not that's sort of like a meme that I think people have picked up on in my
Okay.
community. But
Okay.
they say that I have like a historical
Like you look like a
face.
young soldier in World War One type
Yeah, like, I
deal.
don't
I
know.
guess.
I
I
get
don't know.
different historical periods, but that's funny. That's probably
Sure.
someone who's seen that in my
You
comments.
got a nice black and white picture of your gal and your watch in your pocket watch.
Yeah.
Remember
Yeah.
what you're fighting for meme, and it's a
Mm,
Yeah, the
liberal
modern equivalent of that
populism
is like
picture,
having your
and
girlfriend on like your phone wallpaper.
yeah.
exactly.
$5 from Ratman. It is due to the depoliticization that illiberal actors succeed. It is an externality of post-truth populism. This was a follow-up to his uh, statement earlier for $10 that populism necessarily leads to depoliticization. So that's his point. Okay. Thank you for the gift membership from True Striker. Thank you. Sax Whale for $5. Populism is low resolution. Pluralism fits liberalism better, but pluralist ideas can be framed populistically to motivate people. Do we agree? Disagree?
I think that's pluralism. Liberal ideas can be framed in a populist way to influence people. Yeah, for sure.
Another membership from Hedonic Samuel to say chocolate milk in the water fountains. Okay.
Good idea. Actually, bad idea. That would like curdle or something,
Yeah.
right?
Look, chocolate milk. Wait, Ryan opposes chocolate milk for the people. He hates poor people. We're learning this line.
No. Here's the liberal populist move. You say you want sparkling water in the water fountains instead. That's still a gift, but it's more realistic. They have that.
Sparkling water. That sounds elitist to me, buddy.
They have that in Florence. I went to a place where they had that whenever I was like doing a thing after college.
Cool.
They have sparkling water in the water fountain.
$5 from It's Vishy. What do the panelists think of populistic court packing?
As opposed
I'm
to
in
regular
favor of
court
I
packing?
think court packing is not enough to solve the problem. I think we need broader court reform, but I think adding seats to the Supreme Court could be part of that solution. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I'm in general
$5.
pro court packing. I just don't know
I don't.
populist
Look,
court
we've had.
packing is.
If I at my count, we're at the third court packing debate. I don't want to do a fourth tonight. If
Fair
you'll
enough.
allow me
Fair
to
enough.
avoid
You're
the
a
topic.
coward.
$5 from Tip to say populism requires the villainization of the elite so that the people can rise as a distinct group. It is inherently divisive.
Well, that's the polarization point. I mean,
Yeah, no, for sure.
and I mean, the elite, it's very easy to go from describing a specific people who are part of the elite to just a generalization of the elite. And I think being careless with that jump, it's not much of a jump, you know, it's just a step. And I think we've overlooked it this evening. I think in the modern context, it's more important because of our social media landscape. So I think ignoring that aspect of populism, even, you know, with things that I wouldn't describe as populist, you could call it rhetorical, and not realizing the responsibility around that, it's just insane, especially with the examples we have of populism as it is.
Okay. $5 from Sax Whale, and this is for Ryan and Loner. If you're debating populism, you should offer the alternatives: pluralism, technocracy, etc. Is there an agreement on what the alternatives are? So yeah, I guess this is to rephrase the question a little bit, and thank you for $5. If not populism, then what?
Well, okay.
Depends on what we're referring to. Because I was wanting to ask earlier, like, what do you call this? Let's say, like, because I think we all agree that there is a problem with this kind of group of people, a lot of them in the alt media, who call themselves generally anti-establishment. They can be left or right. They're like they can fall into like anti-vax quite easily. They're typically very like anti-institution. They have disdain for experts. If someone they like, or if they lose an election, it's always the fault of AIPAC or dark money or rhinos or the deep state. All their opponents are establishment stooges. Everything, like the Democratic and the Republican elite are the same thing. Billionaires, like whether you're left or right, are the enemy. They all are really very enjoyed and appreciated by the Russian Federation and the bot farms. Like, we all agree that this group is a problem, right? That kind of like broad umbrella that I just laid out.
Sure.
Okay, just what do we call them? Who are
Wrong. No,
The wrongs. Oh, okay,
I'm
yeah.
just messing with you.
The right
No,
wing
I
and
mean,
the wrong wing.
I think you can call them populist. I think populist is an accurate description of what they are. I just think that populism is not something that they have exclusive claim to.
Do you
Okay,
but do you worry
we can have a
just
really simple
if I
question.
may just reason, because
Okay.
I think this is another one of my concerns specifically, is that they are they want the term uh pop uh populism to be so broad so that they can be like, I'm a populist too, just like Bernie Sanders, when there is a very big difference and a gulf between the Kyle Kalinskis and the Bernie Sanders, right? Like there's a huge gulf between what we would find acceptable with these two. And so there risks like a kind of effect on people with like when you call someone a populist, like for them to be like, oh, well, that doesn't really bother me because I know these good populists. And so I guess
Okay.
that's the concern. Does that make sense?
Well, if we want to talk about like what's a thing that we can call them to point out the similar negative attributes that they have, I mean that's a good question. I'm open to
Horseshoe
suggestions.
populists,
Yeah,
slopulists. I don't know. Like,
yeah,
I agree with Ryan. I just
slopulist
don't
isn't a
think
bad word.
they don't own the term populism, and like I don't think that if you're just a populism is just anything bad. Like I don't know if that really solves the issue there.
Well, it's not. It's a very particular kind of bad, right? Like there are lots of
Right,
fascists and
anything bad
authoritarians
in
who wouldn't
this
fall into this
manner of
category,
thinking.
right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, but that's why I just think that that particular constellation of beliefs that I outlined, which I think we all agree is very fucking prominent in modern society and is threatening liberal institutions, all that. But I just don't know where the issue is with
Well,
what they're
the issue
generally
being
called
like
as
this
populists.
doesn't,
Yeah.
actually encompass all of them, right? Like they the ways that you've described them, they are similar. What about like how do we distinguish between the the Zog posters or the Jewish question people who that is populism, right? In a sense of saying, hey, there is an elite class of Jews that control the world and like they don't care about the common interests and they're affecting your politicians. Like that is not Kyle Kalinske, although sometimes he does get into Zog posting. Like that is not every populist, that is not every brain rotter. Like, and so saying just populist doesn't allow you to like distinguish these things and really like analyze what parts of these manners of thinking are bad. And so like just like it seems like you're trying to use it because it's like, oh well, this easily defines these people who are all bad, but it's like, does it really? Like,
Well, no,
especially considering historically it doesn't.
it identifies those particular common characteristics in the same way that not all people who believe in liberal democracy are going to be supportive of even gay rights, right? Because in the
Well,
past, lots of liberal democracies didn't have gay rights. But like
maybe
the
what we
same thing
can
that like
do.
some of these some populists are some fascists employ populism, or some populists are fascists. Some of them are communist, like, or some of them are neither. They're just in this kind of weird nebulous middle ground where they don't really advocate for or believe in anything. But like, yeah, it's just one category and it can overlap
Well,
with other ones.
maybe what we need to do instead of coming up with a new word to define those people, and I'm kind of partial to slopulist anyway. But anyway, I think maybe what we could do is come up with a word to define the. And I know you don't want to call this populism, but whatever we would call someone like John Ossoff, I would call that liberal populism. I think that's a way to distinguish those kinds of people from that constellation of authoritarian freaks that you were talking about. But I'm not attached to the term. If we want to come up with some other term to describe the John Ossoffs of the world, I'll happily, use it.
But
if we can come up with a term to describe those people, maybe that would be more productive.
It's more than that. I mean, to build on Lona's description there, there's a narrative.
Quickly, it was only a $5 question, so.
Okay, but just to build on to quickly point out that when you build on, you can build on that by saying context changes, but they've still got this framework for this elite, and this elite they'll shoehorn into some other description of some group of people, and they'll always find an excuse. For example, like if in the Israel-Palestine conflict, we haven't mentioned this evening, but of course there's lots of examples of populism damaging, I would say, that debate and discussion. Right, Israel could become a wonderfully left-wing, have amazing government, and because of the discussion and the way it's been framed as the evil Israelis, some people will simply never shift away from that perspective, whatever Israel becomes in the future. And that is an example, in my opinion, of populism, of where you've got the evil Israeli lobby, the group, whatever you want to call it, and then these people are never going to, or without some very strong intervention, shift away from that perspective, whatever realities, however they change on the ground. And that's really, frankly, toxic. And that brings me to my question I had for you before, Ryan. Sorry,
question real quick, and then I do have more.
Like,
They
what
gave me more
percentage
money.
of populism is the type that Lauren and I are describing, and this other type that you think is so positive and wonderful in terms of its influence in the past 10 years, for example?
Less than it should be. I think if we had John Ossoff 10 years ago, we'd be in a better place.
Okay, but
so
what
I
percent?
couldn't,
Like,
I can't give you a percentage.
okay, but do you think
And,
which is dominating here, the good or the bad?
the bad? That's why we need a corrective. Yeah, we need someone to step in there. No, the bad has absolutely been dominating. MAG is in charge right now.
Is it by accident or is it by design? Is there something in there in terms of how populism, as you see it,
populism is a very effective. Populism is a very effective rhetorical strategy, and so in that, it's not an inherent fact of populism that MAGA should be in charge in 2026. No,
it doesn't have any weaknesses.
Okay.
What?
It doesn't have any weaknesses.
Okay, we can.
I don't
We're
think
circling again.
that I think that.
Yeah. Kyle Link for $20. Oh, thank you for the big 20. Says, great panel, Whick. I came into this confused, but now I fully understand why Wittgenstein said that philosophical problems came down to differences in language. Well, thank you for the $20. $10 from Rice Should Be Fluffy. Wow, what a claim in your name. The problem with populism today is that a populist narrative has to be popular, and you can't popularize a narrative that isn't oversimplified and dumb with our current media environment.
I don't think that's true.
Okay, cool.
I think it's true. I think you can't popularize anything unless it sounds dumb, or can be overly simplified, and that is why populism is on the rise right now. I think some chatter earlier said this, and I didn't read it out loud, but like it is almost definitely like inexorably tied that the reason we're seeing this rise in populism is because of social media and the internet. And I think you can either get on board with like trying to take the best parts of that and move it forward with good ideas, or you can cede all that ground to people who are going to Facebook meme you into a dictatorship. So
I should clarify. I think the part that's not true is that simple is necessarily dumb. I don't think simple is necessarily dumb. I think simple can sometimes be very, very smart and clarifying.
Okay, $5 from General Grievous. Soy Pill is trolling. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising targeted SS and police coming to round them up. It was a last stand, and 2 years later, over 90% were dead. Soy Pill?
Yes, Soy Pill, you fucking idiot.
Troll
I'm a
me?
You didn't even
troll.
know
On my
that.
panel?
I could have sworn they killed innocent people too.
No, I don't think
Maybe
they
I'm
did.
wrong. They didn't kill a single
wait,
innocent
I don't know though. I don't know.
It worries me that you may be
wait,
called
are you
the SS
trolling-
innocent. But
No. I swear to God,
Wow,
there were
Soy
like some
Pill
like
thinks
German
SS is
civilians that
innocent.
died
I
in the
got
Warsaw
it.
Polish
Okay, that's
uprising.
where
No,
we're
am I
going with.
insane?
No. These were like Nazi police officers and SS officers who were trying to send them to a death camp.
I guess it's
I know not a majority of these people were fucking innocent.
Which ones were the good
Majority,
ones?
They killed like
Which
17
hold on.
people or something.
Which ones were the good ones, Soy Pill? Which SS were the good SS?
I'm thinking like, look, okay, you ever seen the Zone of Interest? And there's like the little kids that are like Rudolf Hess's kids
think
that
little
like
kids were
didn't
good?
understand. Like if the SS officers had the little kids in the house and the ghetto Jews uprise killed everyone, I wouldn't condemn them because it's like, hey, like you shouldn't have killed those kids because you shouldn't have, but also they shouldn't have been in a fucking concentration camp. That was my understanding. I'll go read on it. Maybe I'm just wrong.
Fair enough. $5 from Extra Crispy to say the abundance movement is an excellent example of liberal populism. I don't know if I'd.
I was reading my
abundance
chat.
movement
What? Say that
populism.
one more time. I was
Sure.
reading my chat.
The
sorry.
$5 from Extra Crispy to say the abundance movement is an excellent example of liberal populism, and I don't know if I agree with that.
I
Yeah,
think
that's
it
not
could be.
populism,
It could
really.
be framed in a populist way. I don't think it's inherently.
Who's the
populist.
enemy? This is Ezra Klein's movement,
Yeah,
basically.
I mean
That's-
bureaucracy is
Yeah,
the enemy.
I think
there, but
that's the problem, right? The enemy the enemy is a little vague for the traditional abundance agenda, but I think we've seen populists adopt some elements of like an abundance agenda. Like I think Mamdani is the most famous person who talked about making government work better for people, and like in order to have in order to have government work for people, you need to have a working government or something. He had some, pithy little line about that. And, we've seen some abundance style stuff be adopted by populists,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't say that abundance is inherently populist.
I would almost call it technocratic by nature, right? It's all about getting things. But it's been a while since I read the book, so
I think it's almost Bernie Sanders had a good quote on abundance, actually, in one of Ezra Klein's. It was in the 1-year review of abundance video that Ezra Klein did on his channel, where Bernie was asked about something to do with abundance, and he said, "Well, it's not really an ideology; it's just good government." And I think that's sort of the idea with abundance.
I'd have to think about it more. $5 from Ratman. Liberalism is going to need populism to survive the 2030s. Trump is the end of the beginning. The next set of authoritarians will not be as bumbling. Do we agree with this?
I think there's a risk
mean,
of
I think that-
creating the next set of authoritarians if populism goes wrong.
Fair.
So.
I think there's a potential. I mean, who knows what happens after Trump?
The rise of
Predictions make a
Whick.
fool of us
Okay.
all.
True. $10 from Jester the Great. A line needs to be drawn at inclusionary populism, MLK, Bernie, FDR, we are also the people, versus exclusionary, Trump, only we are the people. Liberals can work with the former, not the latter.
Agreed.
Thank you for $10. $5 from the Extra Crispy to say, remember the People's Party in 1890? Were they fascist or communist? Obviously, no. They were left libs. To be clear, I don't remember the People's Party in 1890. That is
True.
not something I'm immediately
quick,
familiar with.
I did a
So.
quick brush through. Yeah, apparently
Free silver.
I'm thinking
I'm the
of
last
something
free
else
silver guy.
in terms of the Warsaw Uprising, in terms of civilian deaths.
Okay.
I was literally like 15 Germans and like a couple of Polish policemen. So I should have said like a slave rebellion where they did absolutely kill children. So that was my point.
Fair enough. It's okay. We were just. I wasn't seriously.
Yeah, but I also spread misinformation to my
True.
audience.
I'm the
And,
world's last William Jennings Bryan stan. I'm just kidding.
Yes.
You will not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. Kidding.
But it was, Captain Dan the Fireman for $5. Just donating to say Mootin L and nah is cringe. Is Mootin watching the show right now? $10 from Riddell PPB. Populism is bad when it's dishonest and equivocates. However, when you are actually going against a malicious, corrupt regime who actively helps out the elites, how would the anti-populist message be against that? And this is, I guess, to Loner and to Reason. So, yeah, how would you not use populism to combat the corrupt, malicious regime actively engaging with the elites against the people?
I think it's by the same logic that you can use like some nationalist rhetoric without being a fascist, or like some socialist or communist rhetoric without being a communist. Same idea.
Exactly. I mean, being anti-authoritarian, we've all agreed, is not necessarily populist, and also it gives you more time and space to focus on the causes of these people getting into power in the first place. So I think it can become an easy distraction, and you get rid of these supposed elite if you ever manage to do that. Is that really solving the problem? I don't think so, and it can be a distraction.
Okay.
So.
$10 from EP Thomas. Populism and demagoguery are different things and shouldn't be conflated. Populism is grounded in the pro-democratic and pro-common good policies of the 1890s party. The word wasn't used before them.
I couldn't tell you about the history of the word populism. I know that's the first time it was really big, really popular in the United States, was with the Populist People's Party in the 1890s, but I couldn't tell you if that was the first time it was used.
That's what I read, actually.
Look, I'm hesitant to say this out loud because this is a genuine question. Weren't they considered the Know Nothing Party? Wasn't that another name?
No, that
for
was a
them?
different thing.
Okay, different thing. Gotcha.
The Know Nothing Party. Well, we didn't.
Okay, just so I know that they're a different thing.
We can talk about that another time. I can do a
yeah.
whole American history rundown sometime.
Sure. $5 from It's Fishy to say Hutch is watching. Unfortunately, he loves ice and Fetterman. Let's condemn the Diet MAGA Democrat Hutch.
People are too mean to Hutch, man. People are too
I
mean
condemn
to
Hutch for saying that we were going to
Hutch is-
hang out in real life in the next 4 days, and then he decided to have his wife or fiance plan a vacation for 4 days, and he clearly is just dodging me in real life. So that's what I condemn him for.
People need to be nicer to
How dare
Hutch.
he
I
wants
don't
to hang
understand
around
it,
his
man.
wife more than you, Soypill. That is
Yeah,
crazy.
pretty fucked. He sees his wife every day. He sees me 0 days a week.
I guess so.
I mean, you could take
Hutch
his
has
wife
always
along
been
with
very
him,
nice to me, and Hutch was the first person to have me on a stream, actually.
Ooh,
What?
fancy.
Yeah,
It wasn't me. It wasn't JJ.
I don't think so. Mm-mm.
Well, anyway, Hutch,
as
if
far
you're
as I
watching,
remember-
I am a Hutch enjoyer, okay? We love the bald look, okay? I am going to shave my head in solidarity soon. So don't worry. Okay, $2 from Extra Crispy to say the disagreement is definitions. Just use Google. Well, I don't think anyone here would consider just Googling it sufficient.
Yeah, Ryan obviously clicked on the Merriam-Webster or Encyclopedia Britannica link on Google. So
And he also paid me $2 for a retracted message. I don't know what he said. It was probably a slur. $2 from Victor Lopez. The debate McLully had with Shark Zero was crazy.
Not familiar.
I
I'm
don't know.
sorry.
Yep. $5 from It's Fishy. We need to be harder on Hutch. He's bad at politics and bald. Okay.
Jesus.
And with that, the poll I put up at the start, this is crazy. It is literally 50-50 to the question, can liberalism and populism be compatible? 50% of my audience, 400 voters so far, have said no, and 50% have said yes.
but if it's
So
your
that's-
audience, Wick, I'll take that as a win because they're biased against us. So
My audience is biased against me. Okay, I'm going to be real with you, but fair enough. Okay, with that said, I want to give everyone a chance to have closing thoughts, closing statements. Shout yourselves out. I have links to all their info in my YouTube description. And gang, remember, if you like the content, hit that subscribe button. We do these things all the time. Tomorrow we're having Ukrainian Anna, Kraut, Bishop, the last Bastion on, and we're going to talk about the state of Ukraine and how the state of the war is and what we can do perhaps as citizens in America or Europe to help in what little way we can. And with that, I'm going to give the ball first to Lonerbox. I'm going to let Ryan have the last word. So Lonerbox, there's your
In the beginning of this Mueller book, he says, "A specter is haunting the world. Populism." Those were the words of two academics with German names who published a section in a volume about populism in like 1969, and there was this whole collection of papers in the London School of Economics from different academics through 67 to 69, so over 2 years, basically aiming to define populism as academics. And it turns out all these participants went there and couldn't agree on a definition. So, no shame, guys. We tried. I don't know. This fucking, I think everyone knows what we refer to when we talk about this establishment sloppulous brain rot that's plaguing the internet and is making basically no one happy apart from Russia and the few fucking wealthy creators who make money off of it. So the sooner we see the back of it, the better. Institutions are actually, most of them are pretty okay, Shit.
Shit, indeed. Well, thank you for being here, Lonerbox. Always a pleasure. Hope you enjoyed yourself. Right, ReasonRiffs, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the polarization that's going on at the moment is a serious problem. It leads to less pragmatic solutions, and I believe in pragmatism. And I think holding onto a narrative and then finding a way of fitting your worldview around that narrative of some kind of elite is incredibly destructive. I think that's going on. I think that's generally the vast majority of what we can consider populism right now. I do respect the nature of language, that the meanings of words change, their usage changes. And I certainly think the intent of every panelist is very good here. We realize a lot of the serious problems we need to face, but we do have to be very careful with the way we use words and overgeneralizations. And yes, we can be simple without being populist. And I think we do need to make sure that we're simple in what we have to say. So I'll finish on that point. And just except to add that I'm planning to cycle to Ukraine probably the end of August. I'll be doing it in conjunction with a fundraiser. Yeah, I'm not that far away. And that's kind of the point to also highlight to Germans, especially because there's a lot of complacency here, just how near we are to a country in conflict and to continue our solidarity with Ukraine. So follow me on
Oh, you mean
YouTube.
literally cycle? Okay.
Yeah.
No, like
hope we can do
literally
it
get
about-
on a bicycle and go. Okay.
Yeah, last year raised, thanks to the DGG community and Destiny, last year raised about 2,000 euros. And that was just cycling to the coast of the Netherlands. And I wanted to go to Italy this year, but I realized I can't do that when I need to really highlight the fact that Ukraine's on our border. And we should be doing more and not let that go into the background. So sorry about the segue, but that was
Oh, you're fine.
topic.
Thank you
promoting
for
a good
being
cause.
here,
That's what
man.
the end is for.
Yeah. It's awesome.
I can't believe you just admitted to taking moneyed interests. Okay, that's crazy after this debate. But no,
Super
we
chats are
appreciate
dark
the
money. Super
True.
chats are actually dark money.
I agree with you. I 100% agree. I don't know who Victor Lopez is, but he sent me more money, right? I don't know.
You could have picked a a better one that didn't have their first
Look,
and
Lex
last name.
Friedman used to give me hundreds of dollars too, and like I'm not kidding. Like he just donated $100 here and there, and like okay, I'll take your money. I haven't seen him around in a while. I hope he's doing okay. Okay, not last. Soy Pill, go ahead, please.
Yeah, basically what I said at the beginning. It sounds like really our disagreement is not on what parts are bad. We all really agree on like what I would call sloppyism. If we want to say that's what populism is, then okay, like I'm with Ryan. If we come up with a new word for whatever the fuck liberal populism is, I want more of that. I think it's good. I think we're capitalizing on energy and frustration that is just going to be at some point directed at the wrong things if we don't grab it. Thank you for correcting the record. Apparently, no innocent Germans died in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. My facts were wrong. You know what? I actually probably fell for the people who compare that to October 7th because I just assumed that there were some civilians who died. So thanks, slopulists, for brain rotting me. Next time I'll just use the Nat Turner Slave Rebellion, which was good and based. Every single part of it. Thanks for watching. I have a vegan video coming out this week, and I'll see you, Ryan, tomorrow night. We're going to sleep in the same room, kiss
That's
and
right.
hug and cuddle.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
Are you gonna stream it? Can we super chat?
absolutely not going
No.
to stream it.
No.
Okay. Well, no, thank you for being here. Soy Pill, always a pleasure. Always appreciate you. And yeah, check him out, gang. Last but certainly not least, Ryan, go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you, Whick, for having me back. Thank you, Soy, for being a fantastic debate partner. Thank you, Lonerbox and ReasonRiffs, for putting up with me. It was great meeting you both. I had a great time. Hope you guys felt like this was a valuable discussion. I know that I did. So thank you so much for being here. I just want to say, as someone that, my minor was history in college, so I have a bias towards, liking these things and reading about them. And I think when we look at the historical record, we see liberalism and populism part and parcel. I think we see the struggles for more freedom, for more equality, for universal brotherhood bound up in a struggle of the people against the elites. I mean, I can't put it any other way. I think that's happened over and over again through history. So no, I don't think liberalism and populism are incompatible. I agree with Soy that, we all agree on what the bad stuff is. I think it sounds like we've come to a pretty good idea of what the bad stuff is. I think Lonerbox put it well earlier with the kind of authoritarian freaks online. However, I think that people like John Ossoff and their liberal populism, if we want to come up with another word, that's fine. But that's what I'm calling it. I think that's great. I think it's accurate and good to describe the Trump administration as essentially a cabal of corruption and an elite preference. So thank you so much. I've got a new video coming out, hopefully tomorrow, if not in a few days.
What's it about?
It's a political compass. I've done too many serious politics videos in a row. It's a political compass
Of
all the
compass?
different
Okay, yeah.
of all the different ways that you can organize yourself politically. So this is a fun one. The
It's
last few have been-
horoscope. It's a horoscope for political nerds.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what political
yeah.
compass
The last
is.
I try and do a fun one every now and again. You
Okay,
gotta
check them out, gang. I have a link to the video of Are Liberals Fear? I forget the title of the video, but it's about liberal populism. Go check it out.
Whichever one YouTube picked for me.
Yeah, I don't know. They do the A/B testing stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
with that, wave goodbye, everyone. I'm just